Chapter 2290. The only array they could rely on collapsed at this moment. Instantly, all of them felt hopeless. The youth who was slowly walking over with a sword was like a demon from hell, about to reap their lives. Xiao Yang's absolute strength had also caused everyone to sink into fear and shiver in fear. After all, how could they possibly contend against such a powerful person? What was the difference between them and lambs waiting to be slaughtered? Bai Yingfeng's expression turned extremely ugly because of this. He wanted to resist, but his hands kept trembling. His fame and fortune had turned into smoke at this moment. All that was left was endless fear and death. They didn't want to face this reality. However, their opponent was almost here. What could they do? There was no way to run away from it. I will fight you to the death. One of the martial kings couldn't take the pressure anymore. He revealed his true form and rushed toward Xiao Yang. However, before he could reach him, his head was chopped off by a ray of sword light. That wasn't the end. The ray of sword light kept flashing and killed all of his life force. It was only a single sword strike, but it was enough to kill a martial emperor expert, although he was only a first-rank martial king. Was the gap between their abilities really that big? Therefore, how could they not be terrified? Even if we die, we will die. What's the point of waiting to be killed? Bai Yingfeng suddenly shouted angrily. They had no way out now. All they could do was fight with their lives. That was the only way they could survive. If he were to resign himself to his fate, then he would truly be dead. That wasn't the result they wanted to see. With this loud shout, everyone in the White Bear tribe realized that cowardice was useless. Everyone revealed their true forms one after another, preparing to fight to the death. Perhaps they had the advantage in numbers and had the opportunity to tire this pervert to death? If they were lucky and he was heavily injured in the battle, they could find a chance to kill him. That would be great luck. Whether they succeed or not, they could only know the result after fighting to the death. Plunder like fire! With a deep roar, countless flaming sword cheese rose up and revolved around Xiao Yang, forming a sword barrier. All the warriors who rushed up were injured, even if they didn't die. Bai Liguang was the first one who couldn't take the pressure. He was the first to bear the brunt. Powerful lightning exploded, but it didn't hurt Xiao Yang at all. Instead, it was pierced through by the godly sword. Bai Liguang stared blankly at the sword. His heart was in complete despair, and he couldn't even muster the will to fight back. Just this sword strike was enough to make him realize how terrifying the gap in strength between them was. This wasn't something that bravado and bravery could make up for, even though there was a lot of unwillingness in his heart. So what? Encountering such a powerful opponent, there was no possibility of survival at all. Kill! At this moment, waves of killing intent could be felt from behind. Ji Fei, Shen Wushuang, and the rest led the elites who still had the ability to fight and charged forward. It was not easy for Xiao Yang to kill all the white bear beasts alone, but with their participation, this matter was no longer as simple as it seemed. At this moment, the battle cries were endless. In a short time, the battle began. Because the White Bear tribe's morale had hit rock bottom, they were unable to resist the Alliance Army's morale. Bai Yingfeng was so scared that his liver and guts were about to burst. He didn't dare to stay any longer. Instead, he turned and ran. In such a one-sided battle, wouldn't he be an idiot to continue fighting? As long as he could stay alive, he would have a chance in the future. If he died in this place, then everything would be over. With Bai Liguang's death, Bai Yingfeng began to flee. Instantly, the White Bear warriors were in disarray and began to flee frantically. However, Xiao Yang did not give up. He kept waving the sharp sword in his hand and killed all the martial emperors. In Xiao Yang's eyes, all martial emperors were a threat. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, all of the martial royal realm experts had died in Xiao Yang's hands. Even Bai Yingfeng, who was running away, could not escape. After killing all the martial emperors, Xiao Yang went to West Wind City alone and went straight to the root of the problem. there were still martial emperors guarding West Wind City and Spring Sun City. As long as he killed all of them, he could rest and wait for the results of the victory. The martial emperor expert stationed in West Wind City did not even have time to activate the defensive array before he was killed by Xiaoyang with a single slash of his sword. Immediately, West Wind City was in chaos. Flames filled the sky. In a courtyard in the Sword Heart Realm, a man with a face as white as jade was lying on the ground. He held a wine jug in his hand and was drinking. Beside him, there were dozens of jars of wine. Half of them had been emptied. As for this man, although he was already dead drunk, he was still drinking. At this moment, Li Chuanyi walked over and said, "News of victory from the drifting cloud realm. Bai Lizi and Bai Wuxi were killed by Xiaoyang. All the invading White Bear warriors were wiped out." However, when Bai Jian heard this, he smiled as if he did not feel anything. It was as if the general trend of the world had nothing to do with him anymore. Looking at his senior brother's drunken appearance, Li Chuanyi could not help but feel sorry for him. He still wanted to say something, but found that he was already drunk and had fallen asleep. Li Chuanyi shook his head and walked out helplessly. "Ancestor," senior brother, "is so depraved and has given up on himself. Aren't you going to do anything?" Li Chuanyi roared angrily. How could Li Fengmu not feel heartache? His descendant's talent was not bad, but he wanted to pass the sky sword to Bai Jian. It was obvious how much he valued Bai Jian. However, were things so simple sometimes? How could it be so easy to get rid of the flaws and dirt in one's state of mind? If the problem could be solved with a few words, the Sword Heart Realm would have been dominated by experts long ago. The swords of the Sword Heart Realm were the sharpest, but their hearts could also be said to be the weakest in the Four Realms Alliance. Once they suffered a setback, it was like a broken sword difficult to repair. Let him indulge for a few days. Maybe he will figure it out that day. Li Fengmu smiled bitterly. He could not believe his own words. Chapter 2291. After the news of the great victory in the Flowing Cloud Realm spread, the entire Alliance army's morale was greatly boosted. Especially the Sword Heart Realm, which formed a triangle, their morale was even higher. As for the God Realm and Sun Snow Realm, because they did not suffer from the flames of war, they were slightly calmer. However, after King De returned from scouting, he immediately gave the order to send more reinforcements to the Sword Heart World and the Drifting Cloud World. Because of the information from Xiaoyang, he and Prime Minister Jiang Zhangqing came to the conclusion that the other party would definitely retaliate. And if they wanted to maintain the stability of the God Realm, they could not lose these two main battlefields. Without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. This was something they naturally understood very well. And King De's return this time had also increased his realm. As for King Qin, he went into seclusion, saying that he was going to break through to the third level of the Martial Emperor realm. When the news spread, the entire Alliance army's morale began to skyrocket, because they were very clear that as the Almighty's strength increased step by step, they would be more stable in the future. As for the plan to join forces with the Inflame realm, because the God Emperor had yet to come out of seclusion, it was still put on hold. Of course, even if they could join forces with the Inflame realm, it would not reduce the pressure by much. It might even cause others to covet it. These were all uncertain. He could only advance step by step and raise his own strength first. Only then would he be qualified to negotiate with others. Otherwise, the consequences would be very terrifying. Coping with changes by sticking to the status quo was the best way to deal with a weak realm. Sometimes, if you were to make friends with other realms, you might be misunderstood. Therefore, under such circumstances, it was better to do nothing to avoid getting into trouble. On the God Realm side, some aristocratic families began to have some complaints because the God Realm greatly supported the Flowing Cloud Realm and the Sword Heart Realm. Fortunately, with King De suppression and the old Prime Minister's support, the gossip lessened a little. Under such circumstances, King De made a prompt decision to announce a win-win government decree. Any cultivator of the Alliance Army's world who had outstanding talent could come to the god's capital to cultivate in seclusion. The current god realm was still the place with the richest spiritual energy in the Alliance. Although it was said that there were very few opportunities in the divine realm, there were still some unique advantages that were hard to match. After such news spread, many people immediately cheered. If he could go to Shindu to cultivate, he would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. This was the only effective way to create a large number of experts in a short period of time. As for how many martial emperors they could produce, that was a huge problem. After all, if one wanted to break through to the martial emperor realm, regardless of whether it was knowledge, experience, opportunities, or other aspects, they were all indispensable. No matter which one he lacked, it would be difficult for him to take that step. Even though the martial emperor's karmic luck was no longer so rare in the middle world, it was still a huge hurdle. If one wanted to cross it, one would at least be a 1 in 1,000 existence, and this number was based on King Wu's peak. From the looks of it, the flowing cloud realm had the highest success rate. However, this was based on the fact that King Wu had fewer peak experts. In a defensive battle, the main force of the soldiers were the god realm's warriors. Although the flowing cloud realm had experienced a few great opportunities, the overall standard of their strength was still far from the god realms. Compared to the middle world's veteran worlds, it was a world of difference. To increase the strength of a world was definitely not something that could be done in a short period of time. It required a very long time of management. Moreover, there were many risks involved. Who knew if there was a mistake somewhere, it would result in failure? In the flowing cloud realm, it could be said that these few days were filled with jubilation. Everyone was celebrating the victory of the war. Xiao Yang also allowed all the cultivators to relax as much as they could during these few days. After all, there would be an even more terrifying battle to come. As for these few days, there were no risks. Even if something were to happen, Xiao Yang would be able to immediately make a decision and defend himself. However, the probability of this happening was very small. Lying on the familiar rattan chair, Xiao Yang also felt very relaxed. During this period of time, because he did not know the opponent's goal or when they would attack, he had been very tense. It was not easy for him to be so relaxed now. Besides Xiao Yang, Xiao Hua was slowly devouring a low-grade spiritual weapon. It seemed to be enjoying a delicious meal. The speed of its eating was also very slow, as if it was savoring the taste. You are just a little greedy. In the future, do whatever I tell you to do. Don't run when you see something delicious. If I did not discover it early last time, our defense line would have been broken. Xiao Yang rolled his eyes and said with some blame. When Xiao Hua heard this, the flames rose and it made a huff sound, as if it was expressing its dissatisfaction. Seeing this, Xiao Yang could only laugh helplessly. Although Xiao Hua had already developed spiritual intelligence, it was still a little too young after all. It was like a child, so it was inevitable that it would be a little playful. The last time Xiao Yang urgently mobilized Unrivaled God and the others, it was because Xiao Hua could not control itself. Tell me, have I ever mistreated you all these years? What did you want to eat that I didn't help you? Now that the situation is different, we have to be more careful. We have to be careful to eliminate even the slightest accident, Xiao Yang said. Xiao Hua was still making huff sounds, but this time it seemed much more docile. Seeing this, Xiao Meng sneered and said, "Young master, Xiao Hua is so cute. Isn't it a little inappropriate for you to scold it? Besides, its performance was not bad. It even devoured Bai Lizi, a level 3 martial emperor. Is that a small contribution?" It was a big contribution. Even if it didn't devour Bai Lizi, that guy could only wait for death. What's the big deal about eating it a little later? Xiao Yang said with some dissatisfaction. However, after it finished eating the spiritual energy, it ran to Xiao Meng's feet like a wronged child, seeking protection. Xiao Meng patted Xiao Hu gently and said, "Don't worry, young master said it in a moment of anger. If something really happens, he'll beat you up." Although Xiao Hu was very powerful, and even martial emperors were afraid of it. It knew how to restrain itself. Therefore, no matter how close Xiaomeng got, she did not feel the slightest bit of heat. Xiaohua nodded, looking like it understood that it was right and wrong. Chapter 2292. Looking at Xiaohua's shameless appearance, Xiaoyang covered his forehead in despair. If he wanted to make this childlike Xiaohua understand the reason behind this, it was undoubtedly playing the lute to a cow. Therefore, Xiaoyang could only put this matter aside for the time being and stop thinking about it. After all, it was enough as long as he could contribute. Sometimes, asking for too much and having too high expectations was not a long-term solution. Moreover, it would take a long time for Xiaohua to grow up slowly. It was not something that could be done in a short period of time. However, seeing Xiaohua being so close to Xiaoman, Xiaoyang was quite satisfied. This was because if Xiaoman went out to train in the future, with Xiaohua's protection, he could ensure her safety. Seeing that Lil Fire had transformed into a kitten, Lil Man picked it up. Love was not meat. If Bailizi saw that the ferocious spiritual fire that had been chasing him and biting him was so docile now, he would probably be so angry that he would come back to life. Then, Xiaoyang ignored them and walked out alone. When he walked into the hall where Sun Dishing and Sun Yukai were working, the two of them quickly surrounded him and greeted him. "Have you counted the spoils of war? How is it?" Xiaoyang asked with a smile. Sun Yukai and Sun Dishing looked at each other and nodded one after another, then began to report. The harvest this time could be said to be very rich. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were as rich as a country. The wealth that they had obtained was almost the same as the wealth that the drifting cloud boundary had accumulated now. Hearing the report, Xiaoyang's expression became more and more serious. The more things Bai Wuxi had, the more it explained the problem. If he wasn't really valued enough, how could he have so much wealth? Perhaps the problems he would face in the future would be even more serious. After listening to the report, Xiaoyang felt that his head was about to explode. "City Lord, I plan to divide the spoils into 3 parts. They are to be used for the Alliance army, for the storage, and for the various sects to equip our own strength," Sun Yukai said in a deep voice. Xiaoyang nodded with a smile. "Just do as you see fit. The situation might become even worse. Therefore, you must survive when the time comes." When he said these words, Xiaoyang's tone became particularly heavy. Originally, Xiaoyang had thought of arranging for a martial emperor to protect them or send them to the divine realm. But on second thought, when the time came for an all-out war, no matter where they would be live targets. With their current cultivation base, they might be able to survive if they kept a low profile. It could be said that if the flowing cloud world did not have the two of them to manage it, then the overall development of strength would definitely become much slower. "City Lord, don't worry. Our revenge won't end here. We won't give up our lives just because of this," Sun Dishing said. The two of them had always been like this. Xiaoyang nodded in satisfaction. He felt that this was the best course of action. "I wonder when Senior Muyang and the others will return," Sun Yukai asked. It had been many years since they left. Until now, there was still no news of them. Now, the flowing cloud world was lacking manpower. If they were here, perhaps the situation would be better. Even King De and King Qin, who left the divine realm, had returned. Only the people who left the flowing cloud world were still unknown. Xiaoyang smiled helplessly. If they were in the flowing cloud world, he would be able to find them no matter where they were. But once they left the flowing cloud world, it was almost impossible to find their whereabouts. Regarding this, Xiaoyang could only smile bitterly. Moreover, the outside world was incomparably dangerous to begin with. Whether or not they could return was a huge problem. Now, they could only hold on to this thought. At least this way, they would still think that they had only gone out to scout for information and had not returned because they had lost their way. After chatting for a while, Xiaoyang returned to his courtyard. He had already explained everything that needed to be done. At the same time, Xiaoyang began a new plan. The first line of defense that he had set up was now completely negated. If West Wind City and Spring Sun City were to form a line, and with Summit Victory Mountain as support, it was indeed very feasible to form an indestructible triangle. However, due to the lack of powerhouses guarding, it seemed a little inappropriate. The line of defense that they had taken back was still being guarded. However, they did not arrange for the main force. Instead, there were 1 or 2 small teams acting as scouts. Based on their current situation, they could only rely on Triumph Mountain. However, during this round of adjustment, many of the previous criticisms were removed. The whole body became more coordinated. Even if they were new warriors, they would still be able to get along in the shortest amount of time. During this time, there was also some good news. Due to the continuous battles, Shen Wushuang was enlightened and successfully broke through his current level to become a second-level martial emperor. As a result, the person guarding the front was naturally replaced by Shen Wushuang. The defenses of the Flowing Cloud Realm also became even stronger because of this upgrade. On this day, Xiaoyang was still resting in his courtyard when an old friend came. "Brotherly, I haven't seen you for a few years." "You haven't changed at all," Xiaoyang joked. The person who came was Li Chuanyi of the Sword Heart World. They had become allies in the 10 Directions 8 Wastelands map. It was a pity that there was a black sheep later on, so he had to travel alone. However, this was also one of Li Chuanyi's strengths. Even if he was alone, he could fight for a place for himself in the team. As for what happened in the Tomb of the God of Sin, it was out of his control. They had a tacit understanding not to take it to heart. "Lord Xiao, I didn't expect the gap between us to be so big after we parted in the divine capital back then," Li Chuanyi exclaimed. Back then, their realms were the same. Now, there was a world of difference. "Brotherly, sit down and have some tea," Xiaoyang said with a smile. Li Chuanyi also knew this friend of his. He was never a stickler for complicated etiquette, so he simply sat down. "You came this time to ask me to visit Bai Jian." As soon as Li Chuanyi sat down, Xiaoyang poured a cup of tea and asked with a smile. The young man with the sword also nodded solemnly. He came this time precisely because of this. Otherwise, why would he make a personal trip? "I hope Lord Xiao can make a trip for the sake of our friendship in the past," Li Chuanyi said. Chapter 2293. Brotherly, you're being too serious. Is there a need to say this given my relationship with Bai Jian? Xiaoyang smiled bitterly and helplessly. After learning about Bai Jian's recent situation, Xiaoyang did not feel good in his heart. What a proud person he was. But because he forcefully killed the enemy when he was about to break through, he made a mistake and his cultivation could no longer advance even half a step. Of course, the biggest blow was to his mental state. To a large extent, Bai Jian had become dispirited because he had suffered such a huge setback and could not continue. Although Xiaoyang did not know Bai Jian very well, he still knew a little about him. Under such circumstances, how could it be easy to persuade him to start all over again? These things were not something that could be explained in a few words. Once a breakthrough failed, it would not only cause an obstacle to the mental state, but it would also cause a blockage in all aspects of the cultivator. This was also why many cultivators would not break through at the last minute and would instead find an absolutely safe place to do so. Breaking through at the last minute sounded very cool. However, once the slightest problem occurred, the consequences were not so easy to bear. In this regard, Xiaoyang was helpless in his heart. Sometimes there were many things that needed to be faced and overcome by oneself. After all, the words of others were just words. How could it be so easy to achieve the effect of enlightenment? And this was a headache even for Xiaoyang now. It was not that he did not think of going over, but he did not think of how to bring it up. However, now that even Li Chuanyi had come in person, Xiaoyang could no longer put this matter aside. He had to come up with a perfect plan to go over. Li Chuanyi smiled. He also understood that Xiaoyang's character was naturally not bad. Since he had agreed, this matter would naturally be set in stone and incomparably reliable. However, When he thought of the current situation, he sighed inexplicably. The current flowing cloud world was also in troubled times. Moreover, it was hard to say what would happen the moment he left the flowing cloud world. It was hard to say what would happen. Therefore, no matter what, he could not afford to make any mistakes. "Thank you, Lord Xiao," Li Chunyi said. Xiao Yang just smiled and nodded. At the same time, he began to plan quickly in his mind. What should he do next? What should the flowing cloud world do to protect itself after he left? These were all things that needed to be carefully considered before he could come to a conclusion. Moreover, in such an eventful period, a single misstep could lead to eternal damnation. Therefore, under such circumstances, how could Xiao Yang be careless? There were many things that needed to be carefully considered. However, due to the lack of information, he could only follow his plan. "Senior Li's body should be fine now, right?" Xiao Yang asked with a smile. Li Chunyi nodded and said, "Ancestor's injuries have completely recovered, and he has joined forces with Princess Mingzhu to hunt down the remaining members of the Blue Wolf clan. However, the two of them are really annoying. They appear and disappear unpredictably in the Sword Heart world. It's really difficult to catch them." This was also the reason why Princess Mingzhu could not leave the Sword Heart world for a long time. It was because blind left and blind right were too cunning. Even though they had been completely wiped out, they were still constantly harassing the Sword Heart world. Moreover, once they attacked, they would begin to flee and hide in less than 10 minutes. As a result, it was impossible to catch them. Under such guerrilla warfare, the Sword Heart world could be said to have suffered heavy losses and was suffering unspeakably. If that's the case, let's take the two wolves first. Xiao Yang smilingly said. This was because he did not know how terrifying the next attack would be. If he could summon Princess Mingzhu back, it would be much safer and he would not have to continue to be in fear. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Yang had already figured out many problems in his heart. As for the unknown risks, he could only put them aside for the time being. After all, some things might not necessarily happen. Sometimes, worrying too much was not of much use. On the contrary, it could solve some problems that could be dealt with and avoid a lot of risks. Won't this be a waste of time? Li Chunyi asked worriedly. After all, the backbone of the drifting cloud world was now Xiao Yang. It was already a bit risky to let him leave and persuade Baijian. If he fell into the quagmire of being hunted again and could not extricate himself, it would be really bad if there were problems in the drifting cloud world again. Perhaps there would be even more terrifying losses. How could people not think about these problems? Although it had been calm these days, who could say for sure when the powerful storm would descend? Xiao Yang waved his hand and said, "You don't have to worry about this. If there really is a problem, I will rush back as soon as possible." "In that case, I'll have to trouble Leader Xiao." Li Chunyi bowed and said. Li Chunyi also understood that since Xiao Yang had already thought through all the problems and key concerns, there was no need for him to say anything more. After all, he had good intentions. It was more or less inappropriate to reject him like this. Moreover, if the scabies of the Sword Heart world could be eradicated, it would reduce a lot of pressure. "Why do we have to be so polite between us?" Xiao Yang said indifferently. Not to mention their previous relationship. Now that they were allies fighting side by side, it was normal for them to do these things. What was strange about it? Li Chunyi also nodded with a smile when he heard this. With their relationship, it seemed that there was indeed no need to be so polite. After the two talked for a while, Li Chunyi took the lead to return to the Sword Heart world. Xiao Yang also immediately began to make arrangements. He let Sun Dishing and Sun Yukai seize the time to distribute the spoils of war they had obtained, so that when the battle started again, it would be difficult to continue because of the lack of resources. Moreover, he also went to the Victory Mountain and let most of the martial emperors be stationed on the mountain. The formation on the mountain had to be rotated every day and had to be opened all the time to avoid being caught off guard. As for the two cities of West Wind and Spring Sun, they were still in their original state. Once the war broke out, they would directly give it to them. As long as they could defend the Victory Mountain, then everything else was no longer a problem. Moreover, even if the powerful experts of the opposite side came, as long as everyone could work together, it was still possible to defend for half an hour. Chapter 2294. During these days, the Sword Heart realm was suffering unspeakably. During this period of time, countless cultivators were scratching their heads anxiously, but none of them could think of a good solution. Of course, it was not a big deal if they scratched their own hair. After all, during this period, many top cultivators of King Wu had lost their heads. Some of them even died without a complete corpse, buried in the mouths of those beasts. In the battle in the Western Plains, they had won a complete victory. They had almost wiped out the invading enemies and even killed a third-level martial emperor expert. As for the first-level and second-level cultivators, there were also many of them. They could not be counted with both hands. However, there were 2 fish that escaped the net. Not only were they not afraid, but they also began to make some small moves. Since they could not defeat them head-on, they chose to hide and began to fight guerrilla warfare. Every time, they appeared and disappeared mysteriously. By the time Li Fengmu or Princess Mingzhu arrived, they had already run away. In addition, their methods were brilliant, so it was impossible to find them. Li Fengmu and Princess Mingzhu also fussed over this matter countless times, but in the end they were unable to come up with a surefire way to completely eliminate the 2 disasters. Blind Left and Blind Right might be considered weak among the third-level martial emperors, but they were very cunning and smart. Their self-control was even more terrifying. Every time they appeared, they would be very short. After breaking into the city and killing people, they would immediately disappear. Li Fengmu and Princess Mingzhu had also hidden in the cities that they expected to be attacked, but the final result was a little sad. They seemed to have a dog's nose, and their sense of smell was very sensitive. Every time they attacked, they could avoid them. They could even react in time and attack places that were far away. The repeated invasions made the entire Sword Heart world be said to be on tenterhooks. This was especially true for the few remaining peak Martial King realm cultivators. Every one of them was in danger, because the goal of these 2 guys was also very clear. They wanted to kill the top cultivators of King Wu and cut off the foundation of the martial emperor realm. Even though Bai Jian's heart was currently filled with confusion, they would not make a move. This was also why Blind Left and Blind Right were so vigilant. They knew that if they could kill Li Fengmu in one strike, it would be difficult for them to escape once Li Fengmu or Princess Mingzhu arrived. Therefore, their goal became very clear. Killing a cultivator at the peak of the Martial King realm would not take much effort. Moreover, he could quickly end the battle and then slip away. Wouldn't that be perfect? At the bottom of a cliff, there were 2 people sitting opposite each other in a dark cave. There was no light in this place, only endless darkness. Occasionally, a chilly wind would blow past. If a normal person were to come here, they would collapse under the chilly wind, no matter how strong their body was. In the darkness, those 2 pairs of eyes were like flames. Blind Zhua, how many did you kill this time? A voice asked in a sneaky manner. The other person also immediately replied, These fellows are really obedient. I didn't gain much this time. Although I killed many people, I didn't kill any peak cultivators like King Wu. After saying that, he felt a little unlucky. These 2 people were Blind Left and Blind Right of the Grey Wolf clan. They had been hiding in the drifting cloud realm. This place was also their hiding place. Blind Right looked at the entrance of the cave and said, I didn't gain much either. These fellows have become clever. If they aren't clever, then they are fools. However, this is also good. They will gather the remaining peak cultivators of King Wu. When the time comes, the 2 of us can kill them all together. Blind Left laughed out loud. As he laughed, Blind Left's eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness. The hatred and murderous intent continued to spread. Blind Left and Blind Right had originally thought that attacking the Sword Heart realm this time would definitely be a good job. Therefore, they had mobilized all the elites and were prepared to do a big job. But who would have thought that they would end up in such a state? Among the Grey Wolf clan who came, only the two of them were still alive. The current Grey Wolf clan was not as simple as having suffered a great loss of vitality. It was even possible that they would not be able to recover from this setback. Therefore, the two of them had been staying in the Sword Heart realm and did not leave. They wanted to take revenge and let the entire Sword Heart realm take revenge for their Grey Wolf clan. They wanted to let them feel pain and know that their Grey Wolf clan was an existence that could not be provoked. Blind Right also revealed a vicious expression. This had also become a knot in his heart. They had spent 10,000 years to develop the Grey Wolf clan. They did not expect that they would be completely wiped out in this battle. Originally, they thought that after this time, the name of the Grey Wolf clan would become more famous and even break away from the control of the White Bear clan. However, they had lost completely. Even their foundation had been completely lost. Naturally, they did not dare to blame the White Bear clan for this matter. Therefore, the Sword Heart realm became the target of their anger. But it's still not easy to lure them out, Blind Right said worriedly. Blind Left frowned. He was also thinking about this matter. Moreover, there are formations in the mountain gate. If we don't join forces, I'm afraid it will be difficult to break all those restrictions. Blind Right continued to talk about the information and worries he had obtained. Blind Left was naturally aware of this, so he had to think carefully and not let the slightest mistake happen. After all, they were as incompatible as fire and water with the Sword Heart realm. If they were slightly careless, they might be completely wiped out. They could join forces to deal with Li Fengmu, but it would be difficult to defeat Princess Mingzhu. If Princess Mingzhu was not here, the two of them could be even more excessive. In fact, the Sword Heart realm would have long been plunged into misery and suffering. Don't worry. Let's cultivate for a while before attacking. It won't be too late to take action when they let down their guard, Blind Left said coldly. Blind Right also agreed, because he felt that the place they had found was indeed not bad. No matter what, they would never have thought that their hiding place would be here. Moreover, they were in the dark. The ones who were most anxious should be the ones in the open. On this day, a young man walked up a tall mountain. He looked ahead and saw everything at the same time. When he looked up again, he saw an even taller mountain peak. That mountain peak was like an unsheathed sharp sword that pierced into the sky. It was also called the Sky Sword Mountain by others. Chapter 2295. This young man was the leader of the Flowing Cloud Realm, Xiaoyang. After Xiaoyang arranged everything in the Flowing Cloud Realm, he came to the Sword Heart Realm. In order not to alert the enemy, he even put on Bai Wuxi's robe that could conceal his aura. Left Blind and Right Blind had a more sensitive sense of smell because they were sensitive to aura. However, as long as it was completely concealed, they would naturally not be able to detect it. One had to know that this robe was not simple at all. If Bai Wuxi had not leaked his aura, even the World Spirit and Xiaoyang would not have been able to find him. It could be seen how exquisite this robe was. It was also because of this robe that Xiaoyang had great confidence in being able to find Left Blind and Right Blind together. After coming to the Sword Heart realm, Xiaoyang directly asked for a map, and Li Chuni followed him. Along the way, he told him all the details he knew. Based on the information he had obtained, Xiaoyang was able to deduce some clues. However, because he had not been able to confirm it, he could only hide it in his heart. Li Chuni had also been following Xiaoyang. Because he was the peak of King Wu, it was easier for him to provoke Left Blind and Right Blind to kill him. Therefore, he was like a bait, waiting for the big fish to take the bait. It was just that after they walked for more than half of the Sword Heart realm, Left Blind and Right Blind seemed to have left, and they could not find any trace of them. Xiaoyang gently rubbed the black robe with one hand and yawned, looking a little tired. These days, he also quietly spread out his divine sense to carefully search for the other party's traces. It was just that the result was not satisfactory. Leader Xiao, you have been here for a long time, Li Chunyi said helplessly. Originally, they thought that this matter could be settled in 3 to 5 days. However, who would have thought that they couldn't even find the slightest trace of a clue? Even if they continued, it seemed to be a waste of time and did not seem to be very meaningful. Xiao Yang shook his head and said, "It's nothing. There are no twists and turns in the flowing cloud realm. You don't have to think too much." In the process of searching a few days ago, Xiao Yang had already gotten the answer in his heart. Left blind and right blind were absolutely rational. Therefore, they had a lot of tricks up their sleeves, and what they could think of was naturally extraordinary. Therefore, he pushed everything back and came up with a new train of thought. However, Xiao Yang did not mention it to anyone. Instead, he kept it in his heart. Instead, he went to many places and used the other party's actions to prove that his deductions were correct. Xiao Yang's concern was whether there was a traitor in the Sword Heart realm. After all, the fact that left blind and right blind could come and go in the Sword Heart realm with ease and were able to come and go without any mishaps every time proved that there was something wrong. As for who the traitor was, Xiao Yang was not in the mood to find out. After all, this was a family matter of the Sky Sword realm. He just needed to help and there was no need to interfere. Perhaps because of this mentality, Xiao Yang also felt that his progress was very fast. It's not a good idea to go on like this. I don't know how long it will take to find them, Li Chunyi said. Xiao Yang shook his head. The next moment, he took out the Pisces token and transmitted all the information he had figured out to Princess Mingzhu. On the Sky Sword Mountain, Princess Mingzhu and Li Fengmu gathered together. They had been sitting there, waiting for news. Before this, they were also here. Because the Sky Sword Mountain was the center of the entire Sword Heart realm, the distance was about the same no matter where they went. Princess Mingzhu took out the Pisces token. After reading the message, she could not help but frown. What's wrong? Is there news from Master Xiao? Li Fengmu asked excitedly. These days, Li Fengmu was having a headache about blind left and blind right. Because he had no other means, he could only pin all his hopes on Xiao Yang, hoping that he could get rid of these two scourges. Princess Mingzhu shook her head and said, "Although Xiao Yang has found some suspicious points, he can't be sure and is still confirming them. However, he asked me to remind Sword Masterly that since blind left and blind right can move around the Sword Heart realm with ease and familiarity, I'm afraid there are some internal problems." After hearing this, Li Fengmu's brows couldn't help but furrow tightly. In that case, some of the problems could be explained. Immediately, Li Fengmu slammed his palm on the chair. I didn't expect there to be traitors in the Sword Heart realm, Li Fengmu said angrily. In Li Fengmu's opinion, it was impossible for Xiao Yang to come out of nowhere. Moreover, in this way, some suspicious points could be explained clearly. Xiao Yang also said that now we can release the news of him coming to the Sword Heart realm. Moreover, we need to spread the news that he got by Wuxi's mysterious ink robe to conceal his aura. At that time, whether we can find the mole or not will depend on Sword Master Li's ability. Princess Mingzhu said with a smile. Hearing this, Li Fengmu nodded solemnly. He couldn't figure out why some people's thoughts were so dirty and would actually do such a despicable thing. However, since there was a way, he naturally had to give it a try. Moreover, if this traitor couldn't be found as soon as possible, it would probably be a hidden danger that would always exist. At that time, once they encountered a stronger opponent, they would probably betray them and open the city gate. With this thought in mind, Li Fengmu immediately gathered a few of his trusted subordinates and began to pass on the good news one by one. Moreover, this time, he was prepared not to trust anyone and was prepared to find the mole himself. When the news of Xiao Yang's arrival in the Sword Heart realm was spread, the entire Sword Heart realm was in an uproar. Moreover, after knowing that Xiao Gongzhu had locked down the hiding place of the two evil beasts, they were even more overjoyed. Many cultivators felt that these days of fear were finally coming to an end. and they didn't have to continue to suffer anymore. Although Xiaoyang had come alone, he alone was enough to do it. Li Fengmu's divine sense also quickly spread across the entire sky Sword Mountain, deliberately observing everyone's actions. However, in a small courtyard he saw some clues. Chapter 2296. In the blink of an eye, Li Fengmu's real body arrived at the small courtyard. He walked over quickly and kicked the door into pieces. The sword chi around him was unstoppable. Even his hair and beard were standing on end. His aura was so terrifying that it made people tremble. Many cultivators on the sky, Sword Mountain, sensed the terrifying aura. They knew that it was caused by the patriarch's anger. However, no one dared to take a look. They did not know why the patriarch was so furious. However, no one dared to provoke him. Hu Beiguang, how did Sky Sword Realm mistreat you? How dare you betray us by spreading information for the bastards from the outside world and harm our own people? Li Fengmu shouted angrily. The person called Hu Beiguang shuddered and sat on the ground, trembling. Hu Beiguang looked innocent, as if he did not know what Li Fengmu was talking about. Patriarch, if Beiguang has done anything wrong, please tell me. Hu Beiguang looked innocent, as if he did not know what had happened. On the other hand, the entire sky, Sword Mountain, was shaken by the shout. Who did not hear Li Fengmu's angry shout? In an instant, there were different opinions. Li Fengmu snorted coldly. He casually grabbed a stone hidden under the bed, and it flew into his hand. Hu Beiguang's face turned ashen. He knew that no matter how he tried to argue, it would be useless. In the face of evidence, all words were powerless and meaningless. In the blink of an eye, Hu Beiguang's expression changed drastically. He even laughed out loud, and his expression was one of insanity. Li Fengmu was disgusted when he saw how Hu Beiguang behaved. How could a traitor like him still have the face to laugh? Or could it be that he was born to be a traitor and had always been proud of betraying his own people? What exactly did this person go through to become so despicable? So what if you know? Even if you kill me, I won't tell you where your left and right masters are hiding. Hu Beiguang sneered. Once he said those words, Li Fengmu immediately sent him flying with a slap. Hu Beiguang's words almost revealed the reason for his betrayal. Li Fengmu clenched his fist tightly. The sword chi around him was almost out of control. It was about to fly out and flatten the entire sky, Sword Mountain. When you were abandoned in the snow, if my heavenly sword sect hadn't taken you in, you would have already lost your life. But now, instead of being grateful, you even harmed my sword heart world. What are your intentions? Or do you have a heart of stone? Li Fengmu gritted his teeth and said. Hu Beiguang stood up shakily. Although Li Fengmu had held back his strength, it was still difficult for him to bear. His entire body was trembling from the reverse flow of his blood and qi. It's all because you're being unfair. Hu Beiguang shouted angrily. Since he had already come this far, Hu Beiguang knew that it was almost impossible for him to escape. Therefore, even if he died, he would die. However, he would not be happy if he did not spit out the words in his heart. Senior brother by Jian is the best in the world. Let's not talk about him. Li Chuanyi, that trash, received dozens of times more resources and grooming than me. However, that trash is only in the same realm as me. If you were willing to give me all these resources and grooming, I, Hu Beiguang, would be the second by Jian. But what about you? You turned a blind eye to me. Hu Beiguang roared hysterically. The attention and treatment he received in the Heavenly Sword sect also made him extremely happy. Even if it was just a little more, he could still go further. How could he not be compared to others when he worked so hard? Was it because he was an abandoned baby? Since you're being unfair, I naturally have to fight back. The left and right masters said that they will do their best to groom me in the future. At that time, I will also be the master of the Sword Heart world. It should be mine. Since you're not willing to give it to me, don't blame me for taking it back using other methods. Hu Beiguang said angrily. Huobeiguang's ambition had always been very big. Back then, in the 10 Directions 8 Wasteland map, he did not hesitate to fall out with everyone in order to obtain a spot to advance. However, it was a pity that in the end it was all for naught. It was also from then on that Huobeiguang's mentality changed. He felt that this was the injustice of fate, so he wanted to fight back and change everything. Bastard! Li Fengmu roared angrily and sent out another palm strike. The impact caused Huobeiguang to smash through a wall and fall limply to the ground. Li Fengmu walked over slowly and said, "Since you feel that I'm being unfair, that's good. I'll cripple your heavenly sword sect cultivation, and then you can go and find your fairness." After saying that, Li Fengmu stabbed his sword directly into Huobeiguang's spiritual vein. On the mountain, Xiaoyang and Li Chunyi stood side by side. I remember correctly. This place is called the Sword Scar Abyss. Xiaoyang looked at the abyss below and said. Li Chunyi agreed and said, "Indeed, this Sword Scar Abyss was left behind by our Heavenly Sword Sect's founder after he killed the evil spirit. That's why it's called the Sword Scar Abyss. Now you should have a clue, right?" Xiaoyang said as the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. When they arrived at the Sword Scar Abyss, Xiaoyang felt that the aura below was not right. It was very abnormal. The Sword Scar Abyss had killed a great demon, and the resentment of the evil spirit could not spread out because the abyss was sealed. Furthermore, because it was sealed, the aura was even more mellow. It was very suitable for non-human cultivators to cultivate inside. At this moment, Li Chunyi also came to a realization. He also understood the logic behind it and said, "Doesn't that mean that blind left and blind right are hiding in the Sword Scar Abyss?" They had searched countless places, but they had not expected blind left and blind right to be hiding in the Sword Scar Abyss. The Sword Scar Abyss was only 100 miles away from the Heavenly Sword Mountain. It could be said that it was really dark under the lamp, but they had not sensed it. The aura in the Sword Scar Abyss is not compatible with us. If we go down to fight, I'm afraid it will be disadvantageous for us," Li Chunyi said worriedly. After all, countless almighties had gone to the Sword Scar Abyss in the past. They had wanted to get rid of all the resentment inside, or look for opportunities, but they had all ended in failure. Countless people had even lost their lives because of this, and this place had become a forbidden area. There's no need to go down. They will come up on their own, Xiaoyang said as he took off his black robe. Chapter 2297. In the Sword Scar Abyss, Blind Left suddenly received the news from Huobeiguang. "I didn't expect Xiaoyang to have already arrived and found our hiding place. It seems that this place is no longer safe. We have to evacuate quickly," Blind Left said anxiously. However, Blind Right did not think much of it and said, "The environment of the Sword Scar Abyss is very suitable for us to cultivate and fight. If they come down, they will be at a disadvantage. What is there to be afraid of?" When he said this, Blind Right seemed very relaxed and casual. Moreover, they had chosen the Sword Scar Abyss as their residence because they had taken a fancy to the great conditions here where they could attack and retreat. If Xiaoyang didn't come, that would indeed be the case. But it's different now. Since Xiaoyang was able to kill Mister by alone, it can be seen how terrifying his cultivation is. "If we continue to stay here, we will be sitting ducks," Blind Left said solemnly. From the information he had received, Blind Left had analyzed that Xiaoyang of the Flowing Cloud World was an existence that could not be provoked. Even by Wuxi, who is known as the future master of the White Bear clan, had died at his hands. What else could prove his power more than this battle record? Blind Right immediately lost his composure. Thinking along this line of thought, it was indeed the case. He didn't dare to be careless in the slightest, and immediately got up. "Let's go." Blind Left and Blind Right did not care so much and directly soared into the sky. After all, the most important thing now was to protect their lives. In fact, they had already made up their minds to leave the Sword Heart realm on this trip. If they wanted to make a comeback, they would have to wait until the war broke out in the flowing cloud world again. Otherwise, if they invaded so easily, it would be no different from sending themselves to their deaths. However, blind left and blind right did not know that someone was already waiting for them above the sword scar abyss. Xiao Yang took off his black robe in order to fully display his strength. After all, he had never fought with blind left and blind right. He did not know how strong they were, so it was better to be cautious. Li Chuanyi, on the other hand, was dumbstruck because he never thought that Xiao Yang would actually be so clever. Just as he took off his black robe, left blind and right blind had already rushed out of the sword scar abyss. It could be said that Xiao Yang had been looking for clues from the very beginning. After confirming everything, he had already set up a trap in his heart. It could be said that everything was linked together to force blind left and blind right to show themselves. When left blind and right blind rushed out of the sword scar abyss and discovered that Xiao Yang had been waiting for them for a long time, they were immediately overwhelmed with shock. They knew that they had been tricked. At this moment, Blind's heart was filled with mixed feelings. He did not expect that his panic would cause him to neglect so many things. It was also because of this that he fell into the other party's trap. You must be sect leader Xiao. Blind has been fascinated by you for a long time. I did not expect you to be such a talented person with such great foresight, Blind was said with a smile. Xiao Yang clenched his hand in the void, and the Thunderfire Divine sword appeared. He said, "If you did not find a spy, I would not have been able to find any clues. You were too careless." Blind was very cunning. He even felt that everything was in the palm of his hand. He did not have a brain like Mr. Bai, but he still wanted to do such a thing. That was why he had dug a dead end for himself. I have learned something. Thank you for your advice, sect leader Xiao. As long as we can become friends, no matter what happens in the future, it will be easy to talk about. After all, it will be difficult for our Blue Wolf tribe to recover after this battle. Why don't we join the Drifting Cloud Realm? Although the two of us are not very strong, we are still at the 3rd level of the Martial Emperor Realm. Blind had a flattering look on his face. From Blind's point of view, their current situation was no different from when they were surrounded. Moreover, they were less than 100 miles away from the sky, Sword Mountain. Li Fengmu and Princess Mingzhu could rush over to help at any time. It was already difficult for the two of them to deal with one of them. This time, it was almost impossible for them to deal with 3 of them. Moreover, Xiao Yang was still waiting here. It was obvious that he had planned everything and had even set up an inescapable trap. If that was the case, how could he possibly escape? Therefore, the most important thing was how to protect their lives. The ancient saying says that wolves have wild ambitions. Do you think I dare to accept you? Xiao Yang smiled and said. Blind's and Blind's expressions turned extremely ugly when they heard this. Right now, the other party's attitude could be said to be very firm. Therefore, it was almost impossible for them to compromise for the greater good. Their hearts were filled with unwillingness. If they were to fall just like that, then who would avenge the blood feud of the Ashwolf clan? Sect leader Xiao, I know that the Drifting Cloud Realm is very short of experts now. After hearing about the battle where you killed Bai Wuxi, the two of us admire you very much. You also know that fanaticism towards experts is always very crazy. This kind of loyalty is also the most reliable, Blinds continued. He still wanted to fight for a chance for himself. If they really wanted to fight, he felt that they would definitely die. So what if it's scarce? People like you are the most dangerous. When someone stronger than me, Xiao Yang, appears according to what you said, I'm afraid you'll stab me in the back immediately, Xiao Yang said coldly. Blind's expression turned even uglier in an instant. He did not expect Xiao Yang to see the situation so clearly. He was not prepared to give them any chance at all. Since that's the case and sect leader Xiao does not trust us, we can only fight. It's just a life and death struggle. What does it matter? After all, if we die, we die. However, if you clean up the mess, the drifting cloud realm might be gone by then, Blinds was said with a smile that was full of provocation. Since they could not pretend to surrender, they would talk about the interests of the matter. Blind Zhou had been silent all this time. He also believed that his brother would definitely make the best choice. Xiao Yang smiled and shook his head because he felt that Blind Zhou was indeed interesting. With such a brain, it was not unreasonable for him to be able to survive in the Sword Heart realm for so long. Blind Zhou felt a chill and fear in his heart when he saw Xiao Yang smile. As long as you die, I will naturally be able to extricate myself. At that time, the two of you will not have to worry about this matter. At this moment, a cold voice sounded. The person who came was naturally Princess Mingzhu. When Li Fengmu questioned Hu Beiguang, she had already moved. Chapter 2298. At this moment, Blind Left was almost in despair. He had not expected these two young people to be so difficult to fool. He wanted to give himself a way out, but it was as if it was beyond his reach. In that case, it's just a life and death struggle. What's there to be afraid of? Blind Left's attitude had undergone a drastic change at this moment. Now, Blind Left also realized that he had no chance or possibility of turning back on this issue. Therefore, all he could do was fight with his life on the line. Only in this way would he have a chance to leave this place alive. Xiao Yang still had a faint smile on his face. He squinted his eyes and looked interested. Princess Mingzhu stood in Blind Left and Blind Right's path of retreat, cutting off any possibility of them escaping. Otherwise, if they really ran away, it would not be easy to catch them again. Blind Left and Blind Right glared at the two of them. At the same time, their auras began to condense rapidly. However, how to kill their way out had become a big problem for them. Soon, Blind Left's gaze locked onto Li Chuanyi, who was standing next to Xiao Yang. He had learned from Hu Beiguang that Li Chuanyi was the descendant of Sky Sword Realm's Li Fengmu. If they could capture him, the other party would definitely be wary of him. At that time, they might even be able to use him as a condition to leave this place alive. However, the problem was that they were being attacked from the front and back. Li Chuanyi was standing next to Xiao Yang. No matter how one looked at it, it was almost impossible to capture him. Blind Left became more and more nervous as he thought of this. Although he saw an opportunity, it was difficult for him to seize it. This was what gave him a headache. Blind Right did not dare to act rashly when he saw that his brother was not making a move. He could only continue to wait. However, their auras were rising rapidly. They were almost unable to control themselves and were about to reveal their true forms. Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu were still watching. Although they had drawn their swords, they seemed very relaxed, as if they were not going to make a move. Blind Zhou also noticed this detail. He started to think quickly in his heart. Why was this happening? Or could it be that they were afraid of something? It could even be said that their target was not the two of them, but something else. However, the more he thought about it, the more chaotic Blind Zhou's heart became. Very quickly, Left Blind thought of a possibility. Could it be related to the Sword Scar Abyss below? However, even after living in the Sword Scar Abyss for such a long time, they did not find anything special about it, nor did they find anything that could make them fearful. Or had he overlooked something? This kind of atmosphere made Blind Zhou feel very depressed. It could even be said that he was very unhappy. However, he could only restrain himself and continue to be in a stalemate. As time passed bit by bit, their hearts became even more pained. That was because such a situation was somewhat unreasonable. The two of you, it seems like you've also encountered some problems. You're just deliberately mystifying things. If you really have the strength, you would have killed us long ago, Blind Zhou probed. Princess Mingzhu's face was as cold as ice. She immediately waved the sword in her hand, and a sharp sword qi swept out like a cold current. Blind Zhou and Blind Zhou could not help but shiver. They could clearly feel the killing intent and power. If they were to fight with their lives, they would not stand a chance. I'm just considering whether to give you a chance to live or to cooperate with you. In other words, I'm giving you a chance to work together. Xiao Yang's lips curled up as he said with interest. Their previous plan was indeed to kill Blindswa and Blindswa on the spot. That way, they would be able to eliminate all future troubles and would no longer have to worry about their revenge. After all, dead people did not have that kind of ability. However, as time passed, Xiaoyang also changed his way of thinking. He felt that he could give it a try. After all, there were many things that could be seen further by taking a step back. He could even gain more. Blindswa and Blindswa could not understand what he meant. They even thought that they had heard wrongly and were a little confused. Previously, Xiao Yang's attitude was extremely firm, and he looked like he was going to kill them. But now, he had the intention to let them live. In that case, what exactly was the problem? This made people have to think about it carefully. After all, there were a lot of problems to begin with. However, no matter how they thought about it, they could not come up with a definite answer. Since Leader Xiao is benevolent, why don't you tell us how to let us live and how to cooperate? Blindswa also restrained his aura and said. Blindswa was now certain that the other party did indeed have the ability to kill him. Moreover, Li Fengmu had not appeared until now. They did not know where he was setting up an ambush. Instead of losing their lives for no reason, they might as well try and see if they could grasp this slim chance of survival. The momentum is very simple. I want you to return to the Wanshou realm and listen for some useful information for me, Xiaoyang said with a smile. The battle between the Alliance and the White Bear tribe could be said to be in full swing, and even the Grey Wolf tribe was involved. Therefore, it would not take long for them to face the entire Wanshou realm. It was naturally difficult for their experts to go out and spy for information. However, these two people were different. They were originally from the Wanshou realm. When the time came, it would naturally be much easier for them to spy. What kind of convenience could they have with their identity? Since Blindswa and Blindswa could lure Huabeiguang to defect, these two people could naturally be called spies. Blindswa immediately frowned as soon as he heard that. In this case, it was indeed a good suggestion. Moreover, their tribe's consciousness was very strong, but they did not care so much about the entire world. After all, it was the most important thing for their tribe to become stronger. The rules of the Wanshou realm had always been like that. Blindswa was also thinking about this matter. He felt that he could agree to it. However, for such an important decision, they naturally needed to discuss before making a decision. Therefore, they only needed a glance to understand each other's thoughts. Sure, it's just a small problem. Lord Zhao's foresight is truly admirable. Blindswa said with a smile. Blindswa also smiled and said, then it's settled. Princess Mingzhu stood at the back, but did not put away her sword. Chapter 2299. Blind left and blind right were well aware of their situation. It was impossible for them to escape. Therefore, the best solution was still to compromise. As long as they could survive, they would agree to some things. It did not matter to them at all. After all, they could do things, but their lives were theirs. If they lost their lives, so be it. They had cultivated for thousands of years to get to where they were today. How could they be willing to give up their lives for nothing? Therefore, they agreed right away. Moreover, even if they agreed, it was another matter whether they would do it or not. As long as they left the territory of the Four-Realm Alliance, or went further, they would not be able to chase after them after they returned to the Myriad Beasts realm. Therefore, even though blind left and blind right agreed quickly, they knew in their hearts that there was still some leeway to turn things around. Both of you seem to be straightforward people, Xiaoyang said with a smile. How could Xiaoyang not know what they were thinking? Since he had already set up this trap, he would naturally figure out all kinds of situations. In particular, it was not difficult to analyze the thoughts and characteristics of these two people from their actions. Blind Left also nodded quickly and said, "It's our honor to be able to cooperate with an outstanding person like Leader Xiao. Moreover, who would be willing to die." Blind Right also quickly agreed. Perhaps most of what they said was false, but the fact that they wanted to live was incomparably real. Princess Mingzhu was still indifferent. She held the sword in her hand. Her aura did not dissipate from the beginning to the end. After all, the current negotiation was only the beginning. They could not say when they would directly start the war. Moreover, in the face of two extremely cunning wolves, there would be something wrong with their brains if they believed their words so easily. Moreover, Xiaoyang had previously said that if the other party was obedient, they could do it. If the two of them had integrity or had other intentions, there would be no other way but to kill them on the spot. After all, it was an eventful period now. They did not want to leave any hidden dangers for themselves. Everyone was well aware of this. That would be for the best, but aren't you agreeing a little too quickly? Furthermore, I have some conditions that I haven't mentioned yet, Xiaoyang teased. As soon as he said this, blind left and blind right's expressions changed, but it only lasted for a moment. Blind Zhuo sighed helplessly in his heart. It seemed like it was unrealistic to hope for a fluke. Since they had ascended from a small world and were able to resist the White Bear tribe's attacks for so long, it could be seen that they were not ordinary people. To be able to reach this step, which one of them wasn't an extremely intelligent person. What other conditions do you have? Blind Zhuo asked with a serious expression. What was to come would come, so all he could do now was listen to the other party's conditions. After all, blind left and blind right were clear that they were fish on the chopping block and had to listen to the other party's orders. As long as the conditions were not too excessive, they felt that they could accept them. Once it exceeded the limits of what they could bear, they could only give it their all again. Therefore, they could only continue to think about how to deal with this matter. There was no free lunch in the world, not to mention that they were all scheming people. So how could they give the other party a chance to turn the tables? Therefore, it was not a problem to be cautious sometimes. I want to inject a strand of my consciousness into your consciousness. If you dare to betray the agreement, I can also use my consciousness to fight you to the death. At that time, it's hard to say whether I can kill you or not. However, it won't be a problem to injure your consciousness and even drop your cultivation to martial emperor, Xiaoyang said as the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Blind left and blind right's expressions were filled with shock when they heard this condition. They knew that such an agreement was akin to losing their rights and humiliating their country. Once they agreed, their lives would be completely in Xiaoyang's hands. It was really difficult for them to agree to such a restrictive change. Isn't this a little too difficult? Blind left said through gritted teeth. It was really difficult for them to accept such a condition. It was not a good thing to have one's life in someone else's hands. If the other party was unhappy, he might directly take action. No matter what they did in the future, they would have to be extremely cautious. Although they might not necessarily die by then, once their cultivation level falls below the martial emperor realm. Based on what the Ashwolf clan had done in the Myriad Beasts realm, it was likely that in less than 3 months, all of their clansmen would be annihilated by their former enemies. The rise of the Grey Wolf tribe back then had offended many people. In the end, they also submitted to the White Bear tribe, which made the situation better. Difficult? If not, how can I be assured to let you leave? Without restrictions, what's the point of the agreement? Xiaoyang said in a deep voice. If he could not get hold of the other party's weakness, the agreement was just empty words. Therefore, this was the only way Xiaoyang could think of. Of course, this was also the best way. Moreover, if he could control blind left and blind right, they would be able to know immediately if there was any trouble in the Wanshou realm in the future. When the time came, he could then make arrangements. It was better to be prepared. Blind left and blind right looked at each other. They did not expect this human to be so cunning. He was even more ferocious than them. Therefore, they were very conflicted. How to make a decision had become a difficult problem in their hearts. It seemed that no matter what they chose, they would not have a good ending. Thinking about it this way, this matter was very depressing. Previously, they were still hoping that they could get away with it. However, Since the other party had already stated the conditions to this extent, they could no longer continue to play dumb. There were some things that they still had to face. Although it was extremely bitter, they still had to swallow it. Of course, when the Wansho realm no longer poses a threat to our four-realm alliance, the agreement between us will be completed perfectly. At that time, I will naturally withdraw my divine consciousness. Xiao Yang looked at the two and said slowly, Chapter 2300. Talking to blind left and blind right was no different from asking a tiger for its skin. Therefore, he had to be careful with every step he took. Therefore, Xiaoyang would deliberately pay attention to their expressions when he spoke, so as to avoid any carelessness and failure to notice some details, which would lead to problems. Fortunately, blind left and blind right's expressions and reactions were normal from the beginning to the end. Therefore, until now, Xiaoyang felt that everything was going perfectly. Blind left and blind right continued to be silent because they had never stopped scheming in their hearts. Sometimes, in order to survive, every decision they made, even every word they said, needed to be carefully considered. Otherwise, if there was any mistake, they would not be able to keep their lives. Even though Xiaoyang said that he would take back that strand of consciousness after the treaty was completed. However, with the current strength of the Four Realms Alliance, it was unknown how long it would take for them to grow to the point where they could suppress the Beast Realm. I am afraid the time limit you mentioned is a little too long, Blind Left and Blind Right said coldly. If they could not catch up to the Beast Realm in 10,000 years, would it not mean that they would be under Xiaoyang's control for the rest of their lives? Although they would still be alive, no matter what they did, their hands and feet would be tied. What was the point of that? They might as well plunge into the sword scar abyss and fight to the death with the advantage of the geographical advantage. In my opinion, this is not a long time. After all, you already know the capabilities of me and this person. Xiaoyang looked at Princess Mingzhu and said. As soon as he said this, Blind Left and Blind Right exchanged glances. When they recalled the information they had received, they were also bewildered. Previously, when they obtained information from Huobeiguang, they heard most about the talents of these two people. If that was the case, their growth was indeed very fast. Of course, as long as you don't participate in the war and only focus on spying and passing on information. If you pass on accurate information and do not deliberately harm us, it's fine even if I die in the war. However, if I die, the treaty will naturally become invalid, Xiaoyang continued. These questions naturally had to be answered clearly. What's more, for some things, the clearer it was explained, the more the other party would be able to understand how powerful it was. He could even analyze and come up with strategies that would benefit him. Instantly, Blind Left and Blind Right had a flash of inspiration. After they returned to the Myriad Beast Realm, they could indeed play dumb and even give all the information to Xiaoyang. That would be fine. If the Myriad Beast Realm really started a war, and it was not the White Bear tribe alone, then how could they possibly withstand it? But was it really that simple? Although Blind Left and Blind Right felt that it was feasible, they did not dare to make a decision easily. After all, they were not in a hurry. That was because they saw that Xiaoyang had come with sincerity, and because of the war they really needed someone to enter the Wansho realm to gather information for them. In this way, things would become much simpler. They even had an inexplicable thought in their minds, which was that this deal might be a profitable one. At least for the two of them, that was the general idea. I still have some conditions, that is, after I die in battle, you can still cooperate with the Four-Realm Alliance. As for the benefits, I can provide you with meridian condensing pills. As for how much your tribe can become stronger during this period of time, it depends on your foundation, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Since they had Huobeiguang as a spy, they must have a good understanding of the Four-Realm Alliance. Blind Left and Blind Right knew what was going on, especially when they heard Xiaoyang's offer. Their eyes lit up. If that was the case, then their Grey Wolf tribe still had a chance to rise. In this battle, their tribe lost 90% of their elites. If they could get a large supply of meridian condensing pills, Although it was difficult to recover to their peak, they could still recover in a short period of time. Thinking of this, the two of them were already tempted. Perhaps it was because of the concept of the tribe that they placed great importance on the interests of their tribe. As for the world, they did not have much feelings for it. Furthermore, the more the other clans suffered, the stronger the Grey Wolf clan would be. Naturally, the strength of the Grey Wolf clan would also increase. They already had an answer in their hearts as to how they should choose. On this point, I won't force you to do anything. After all, the previous conditions were quite harsh. I can show my sincerity on this one, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Seeing that the two of them were already tempted, he could be more lenient on some aspects. After all, their purpose was only to get information about the beast realm. That's good, Blind Left also smiled. Since the other party had already come to this step, he was not stupid and naturally understood the other party's sincerity. Moreover, the Four-Realm Alliance really needed a spy. Speaking of which, they were just taking what they needed. It seemed that such a treaty was not impossible to agree to. The affairs of the world were unpredictable. Who could say for sure how many changes would happen? At least the current conditions seemed to be more beneficial to the Grey Wolf tribe. Seeing that Blind Left did not continue to be in a stalemate, Xiaoyang nodded with satisfaction. This was naturally the best, as long as he injected his imprint into their consciousness. By then, they would have no choice but to do it. Moreover, Xiaoyang's attainment in this aspect had always been high. Therefore, all the building of trust was just a matter of threat and fear. Verbal promises were nothing more than empty words without any proof. To deal with these cunning people, one had to be more cunning than them. Even more, one had to do more things and leave more backup plans. As long as you are loyal enough, if possible in the future, I can even help the two of you to the position of the master of the beast realm. After all, no matter how you look at it, being neighbors with friends is a safer way, Xiaoyang continued. This time, what he said was an even more tempting condition. If they really reached that step, then what kind of terrifying existence would the two of them be? At this time, Li Fingmu, who had already cleared the mountain gate, also arrived. He held his sword and stood on the other side, cutting off the other party's retreat. Chapter 2301. After getting rid of Huobei Guang and the other scum, Li Fingmu stayed in the ancestral hall for a while before heading over. Previously, when Xiaoyang said that there was a mole, he wasn't sure and even thought that it was impossible. After all, the cultivators of the Sword Heart realm had to maintain a clear sword heart in order to move forward and reach a higher realm. However, after a series of tricks, he actually managed to find the mole. This made Li Fingmu feel very pained. That was why he went to the ancestral hall to reflect on his mistakes. Was he too biased and caused such a tragedy? With Li Fengmu's participation, the atmosphere became even more solemn. This added a lot of pressure to Blind Left and Blind Right. They knew very well that if they didn't take any action, they might not have a good ending. Although the previous conditions were indeed tempting, it was hard to refute. Even though it was just empty talk, the chances of it being realized were very small. However, they still wanted to give it a try. What if they succeeded? After all, these things were hard to predict. This world was full of infinite possibilities. No one could say for sure what would happen next. Can the two of you tell me your choice now? Xiaoyang said with a smile. With Li Fengmu's arrival, in Xiaoyang's opinion, the time was completely ripe. Moreover, if they didn't make a decision now, it would be easy for there to be changes. Therefore, it would be best if they could make a decision early and change the situation. Blind Left and Blind Right also understood that their opponent was using both kindness and power. Moreover, he had displayed all his strength and even formed a sure-kill situation, completely cutting off their path of retreat. In that case, they had no choice but to agree. When the two of them exchanged glances, they already understood each other's thoughts and quickly made a decision. We don't seem to have a choice. We can only hope that Leader Xiao will keep his promise and not burn the bridge when the time comes. Blind Left said helplessly with a bitter smile. Although the conditions were indeed very tempting, their agreement was more due to coercion. Moreover, the other party's words were also empty talk. Whether they could be implemented was another matter. If they could, they would naturally choose to fight their way out. However, they didn't have the right to choose at all. As long as you cooperate with me in good faith, I, Xiaoyang, will not break my promise. After all, our cooperation isn't temporary. In fact, it might even be a grand plan, Xiaoyang said. Blind Left and Blind Right only smiled. They had heard such words many times. Therefore, sometimes, there was no need to take it too seriously. Of course, if it came true, they would really be lucky. Naturally, this would also mean that this friend was a good friend. There are a total of 100 meridian coagulation pills in this storage bag. There are also 3,000 of various elixirs that can help one's cultivation. If you are worried, check it first. I will make a move. After he finished speaking, a bag left. Left Blind took it and sent his divine sense into it. Soon he began to examine it. Of course, they had to check it. If they were faking it at the beginning, then it was certain that they were unreliable. Blind Right wasn't in a hurry. He just had to listen to Blind Left's arrangements. The two of them had been together since they were young, so they knew each other's nature. It could be said that the two of them could betray the entire world, but they would never do anything to betray each other. Leader Xiao is indeed a hero. He is a man of his word. There is indeed no problem with these elixirs, Blind Left said, and put the storage bag into his own bag with a smile. Blind Left was very satisfied with this. The things that Xiaoyang gave were all genuine. Moreover, the quality was not low either. Since the other party was so sincere, there was no need to be scheming. After all, the things that were made clear before were not scheming. Li Fengmu's eyes twitched when he saw this. 100 meridian coagulation pills was a supply of a world's annual supply. He didn't expect to give it to them just like that. How could Li Fengmu not feel heartache? Moreover, this was a sure-kill situation. Even though he was displeased, he did not say anything. After all, the price that they paid might bring a lot of benefits to the Four Realms Alliance in the future. If they couldn't bear to part with this, how could they achieve great things in the future? Shall I do it now? Xiaoyang said with a smile. Blind Left and Blind Right looked at each other and nodded in succession, indicating that they could do it. Because there was no choice, there was an additional option. Moreover, it seemed to be more reliable. Therefore, it was no longer a problem for him to make a choice. Sometimes, thinking too much would only bring disaster to oneself. Okay, Xiaoyang responded. He put away the Thunder Fire Divine sword and walked over. At this moment, Princess Mingzhu and Li Fengmu were also eyeing the two of them covetously. The cooperation in the treaty required Xiaoyang to leave an imprint in their consciousness before it could be considered complete. Therefore, before this step was ensured, it would not be safe. If Blind Left and Blind Right were to attack, and Xiaoyang wasn't prepared for it, then it would be a big problem. Therefore, the more this situation was, the more careful the two of them had to be. They had to avoid all risks and possibilities. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The atmosphere also became tense. Everything was built on the basis that everyone would take what they needed. However, who knew if the other party was sincere or just playing tricks? After all, Blind Left and Blind Right didn't seem to be good people. Therefore, they had to be careful. After a short while, Xiaoyang walked in front of the two of them. He quickly began to form hand seals. Wave after wave of miraculous energy was continuously converging. The distance between the three of them was less than a foot. Blind Left and Blind Right looked at Xiaoyang, who was close to them, and concentrated on forming hand seals. Countless thoughts flashed through their minds. Now was indeed a good time to attack. If they could take down Xiaoyang, the other party would be cautious. At that time, they would have an extra way to survive. However, they didn't make a move. Freeze! Xiaoyang shouted. His hands formed sword fingers and pointed at blind left and blind right's foreheads. Chapter 2302. At this moment, the gentle spiritual power turned into golden light and continuously poured into left blind and right blind's heads. Although the center was gentle, a relatively strong aura had already risen in the surroundings. Left blind and right blind were actually still in a dilemma a moment ago, but they quickly let go of this thought. This was because, even at this point, the other party did not show any signs of letting down their guard. From this, it could be seen that they were on guard everywhere. If they acted rashly, they would only bring about bad consequences in the end. Although Princess Mingzhu and Li Fengmu saw that the two did not show any abnormalities, they also did not dare to let down their guard. This was because they knew very well that if they were not careful, there would be irreversible consequences. Naturally, they were clear about which was more important. Moreover, their patience now was nothing. They might even gain more benefits in the future. At the same time, Li Fengmu began to ponder in his heart. If they really succeeded this time, it would definitely be great news for their four-realm alliance. Even more casualties would be avoided because of this. It was also because they knew what was at stake that they were so cautious. In front of such a big plan, how could they dare to neglect it? After all, if there was even the slightest mistake, it would be irreversible. It could be said that how to resist the invasion of the myriad beast realm had always been something that they had racked their brains to do. However, due to the huge gap in strength, they could only take one step at a time. Now that Xiaoyang had come up with a plan and had begun to arrange it, Li Fengmu felt that this was definitely the beginning of a counterattack. Even if they did not attack the myriad beast realm in the future, once the other party invaded in the future, they would be able to immediately take precautions and coordinate. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. This was something that they were clear about. Moreover, all the preparations they made now were to be able to deal with the situation better in the future. After a while, because there was no resistance, Xiaoyang quickly injected the imprint into the two's consciousness. It could be said that now, with just a thought from Xiaoyang, it was enough to make them suffer. In this matter, left blind and right blind had also underestimated Xiaoyang's ability. So what if his cultivation level was lower? If he wanted to kill them, or even make them wish they were dead, it would only take a single thought for him to do so. The reason why he didn't say it was that serious before was just to make her feel at ease. After the imprint was completely engraved, Xiaoyang let out a low shout and shot out 2 palms. Immediately, left blind and right blind were caught off guard and were hit by the palm. They were unable to resist and were sent flying. They landed on the opposite mountain, causing huge rocks to roll down from the mountain and tremble incessantly. In fact, the two of them couldn't even suppress it and directly revealed their true forms. Right blind immediately stood up, and a powerful aura swept out from him. It was filled with killing intent. With regards to Xiaoyang's sudden attack, blind right was extremely infuriated. They had agreed to cooperate, but now he had attacked? What kind of logic was this? Therefore, blind you could not tolerate this. So what if he lost his life? He could no longer tolerate such humiliation. The other party's insatiable greed was a little too much. Left blind also stood up immediately and forcefully blocked blind right so that he could not attack immediately. In an instant, left blind also turned into his human form. He wiped off the blood at the corner of his mouth and said, "Master Xiao is really smart to be able to think of this." On the other hand, blind right was dumbfounded because he did not understand what this meant. Xiaoyang nodded with a smile and said, "That imprint is very hidden. As long as it's not a mighty figure who's a few realms stronger than me, it's impossible to find out. Of course, it's another story if you encounter someone who's good at this." However, in the 10,000 beasts realm, there was probably no one who was good at this. In the White Bear tribe, Baiwuxi was already an anomaly. How could so many strange geniuses appear in such a short period of time? Indeed, it was not a rare thing for human cultivators to be intelligent, or to study some exquisite or strange techniques. However, for the 10,000 Beasts realm it was rather strange. That was the principle of a place having its own people. Due to the different characteristics of each world, the cultivators born in each world were also very different in their areas of expertise. If we return safely, are you sure the White Bear tribe won't be suspicious? Left Blind asked Blind, right in a low voice. Hearing this, Yu Xia came to a realization and understood the logic behind this. If they could leave this place alive, how to deal with it after returning to the 10,000 Beasts realm was another matter. These 2 tokens were specially made by me. If there's any news, use them to transmit it. Xiao Yang threw out 2 tokens and said, after Bailey Kwang caused havoc in the flowing cloud world, he had already started to make the tokens. Since he had foreseen that a war would break out, he naturally had to make preparations everywhere. It was better to be safe than sorry. Left Blind Right and Blind Left accepted the tokens, respectively. After explaining some details, they let the 2 of them leave. Of course, it was not easy for them to leave like this. Princess Mingzhu and Li Fengmu personally sent them out. After all, sometimes it was necessary to be more stable when acting. Since the Sword Heart world had Huobeiguang, would there be a second one? Therefore, every word and action had to be done carefully. If there were any suspicious points left, and it was discovered, it would not be good news. At that time, Left Blind Right and Blind Left would lose their lives, and it was very likely that they would be used. At that time, if they received the wrong information, it would not be good news for the 4 Realms Alliance. This time, the farewell was filled with bursts of sword light. Princess Mingzhu and Li Fengmu were really angry, so their attacks were more ruthless. Li Fengmu was really angry now. Left Blind Right and Blind Left had killed so many of his people, but now they had to leave alive and could not be killed. How could he not complain? However, because of the overall situation, Li Fengmu could only restrain his killing intent and endure it for the time being. The previous sacrifice was indeed tragic, but if Left Blind Right and Blind Left were spies, they could reduce the number of cultivators lost in the future. Because of the timely news, they might even be able to turn the situation around. Chapter 2303 Realm of the Gods. After King Da and Prime Minister Jiang Zhongqing learned that Xiao Yang and the other 2 had failed to kill Blind Left and Blind Right, their expressions turned grim. Moreover, he had also found a traitor and killed him. This was because they felt that this was somewhat illogical. Since they had already made such ample preparations with their abilities, how could they possibly let the 2 ash wolves escape? Therefore, they felt that there was something strange going on. However, they couldn't tell what was wrong. They could only try to figure it out. I'm curious, what tricks did Blind Left and Blind Right have that allowed them to escape from the heavy encirclement? Jiang Zhongqing said with dissatisfaction. The king also shook his head helplessly. If they really knew what was going on, why would they discuss it in this place? King Zhao, on the other hand, had his head lowered as if he was deep in thought. He did not seem to care about what was happening before his eyes. After all, the flames of war hadn't spread to this place. As he was guarding the realm of the gods, he didn't need to worry too much. It seems that the situation is still difficult to change. Princess Mingzhu can only continue to guard the Sword Heart world. Jiang Zhongqing continued. King Da shook his head with a smile. Prime Minister, didn't you say that we only need to provide reinforcements? As for how to deploy them, we will listen to Xiao Yang's orders. So, why do we need to worry so much? It could be said that the idea proposed by the Emperor of the Gods was very good. All the invaders would be stopped in the drifting cloud world and the Sword Heart world, and the realm of the gods would be safe. In this way, the realm of the gods would be able to unleash its greatest strength and become the safest place to nurture experts. In a long war, resources and foundations were sometimes a competition. Jiang Zhongqing smiled bitterly and said, "If he makes a mistake, the realm of the beasts will invade our realm of the gods. What should we do then? Prime Minister Zhang's worries are not without reason. However, the one who understands the realm of the beasts the most is still Xiaoyang. Moreover, in this deployment, isn't it enough to explain everything? We do need to make preparations, but not to interfere with the front lines, King Zhao, who had been silent for a long time, said. These words stunned Jiang Zhangqing. Because of the Divine Realm Tournament, King Zhao bore a grudge against Xiaoyang, yet now he was speaking up for him. Those grudges were now nothing more than small squabbles between allies. No matter how one looked at it, it was somewhat inappropriate to haggle over these things when it was a matter of right and wrong. When it came to matters of life and death, who would dare to be careless? However, this month's harvest is still pretty good. Shen Luo, Shen Fian, Jiang Feiyun, and the rest of the younger generation have all reached the martial emperor realm. What we need to consider now is whether we should send him to the front lines or keep him in the god realm to continue nurturing him. King Zhao continued. The king remained silent. After all, these children had nothing to do with him. Then what does King Zhao think? Jiang Zhangqing asked. King Zhao said, how can one grow without experiencing the flames of war? I think we can let them go and provide support. After all, once the barrier is lost, with the terrain of the god realm, the enemy can directly invade. No matter how conservative we are, I'm afraid we will only delay ourselves. Ever since the god emperor went into seclusion, it was the 3 kings and 1 minister who made all the decisions. Of course, if Princess Mingzhu returned, she would have the absolute right to speak. Jiang Zhangqing stroked his white beard. He had to think carefully about this matter. Every action was of utmost importance. There was no room for error. King Zhao did not say a word. He was happy to be idle. After all, the current situation was not under his control. In the Sword Heart realm, Xiaoyang did not participate in the pursuit. Instead, he went directly to the Heavenly Sword Mountain. Li Chunyi led him to a guest hall. Li Chunyi served him tea at the side. Now he admired Xiaoyang more and more. This person was condemned in the god realm. If it were not for his senior brother's praise, Li Chunyi would not have become friends with him. Now, it seemed that his senior brother's judgment was not bad. The current Xiaoyang was enough to make countless people blush with shame. As for those who condemned in the past, compared to Xiaoyang, what were they now? Master Xiao is really good. I have learned a lot this time, Li Chunyi said with a smile. Li Chunyi naturally admired such methods and scheming. Xiaoyang took a sip of tea and said with a smile, you still have a lot to learn in the future. As the person in charge of a world, you naturally have to consider many aspects. Sometimes showing off a moment of bravery is nothing. Li Chunyi could also understand this point, so he did not say anything at that time. Even though he was unhappy, he agreed with this method. If he let the other party live, he would be able to buy more time for his world to return. That way, he would be able to reduce his losses. He could still see clearly how this deal was going to be. Displeasure was displeasure, but the situation was still the situation. Unless your personal strength was really powerful to the point that no one could compare to, you might not have so many scruples. When an ordinary man was angry, blood would only splash 3 feet. When a superior was angry, the consequences might be difficult to clean up. In our Sword Heart world, no matter what, senior brother Bai is the strongest. In the future, it should be him who inherits the world, Li Chunyi said. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, not to mention that he is now a drunkard with his previous temperament. If he really becomes the sword master, I'm afraid it's not a good thing for Sword Heart world. He is a sharp sword. Li Chunyi frowned when he heard that. He could not be sure about this. After a while, Li Fengmu and Princess Mingzhu came back one after another. After they drove left blind and right blind out of Sword Heart world, they returned directly to Sky, Sword Mountain. Because they did not really kill them, they just had to put on an act. There was no need to chase after them fiercely. Xiaoyang, is it really okay to do this? The 2 of them have wild ambitions and are very cunning. Li Fengmu said somewhat worriedly. Princess Mingzhu had an indifferent look as if she did not care about these. Once my imprint enters their spiritual consciousness, see, some things are not up to them. What's more, each takes what he needs. I think Left Blind is a smart person and knows what to do, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Once you understand someone's thoughts and think along their train of thought, then you can control the other party. Chapter 2304. Although Li Fengmu understood the logic, he still felt that something was amiss. After all, trusting the two ash wolves was a bit of a lie. Moreover, there was no lack of almighty figures in the Wanshou realm. Once this matter was exposed, there might be serious consequences. Therefore, he was helpless. Should I follow you back to the drifting cloud realm or stay in the sword heart realm? Princess Mingzhu asked. This was the question that Princess Mingzhu was most concerned about. The current situation was very unclear. Moreover, judging from the attack this time, the White Bear tribe was still targeting the drifting cloud realm. Their main force was there. Perhaps the next attack would be the same. By then, Xiaoyang would have a hard time resisting it alone. Once the defense line collapsed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although they had planned a few lines of defense, there were very few martial emperors, so they were all gathered together. Therefore, countless lines of defense were only one line. Once the first line of defense was broken, it would probably be the last line of defense. If Princess Mingzhu went, he and Xiaoyang could form two lines of defense, adding an extra layer of insurance. Xiaoyang felt a headache coming on. After all, he needed to think carefully about what to choose. You go to the drifting cloud realm first. Bai Wuxi died in my hands. The White Bear tribe won't let this go, Xiaoyang said with a frown. Moreover, Xiaoyang had already experienced the wrath of this thunderbolt. It was likely that their flowing cloud world would have to bear the full brunt of it. By then, even if something happened in the Sword Heart realm, he could ask for help. Li Fengmu didn't say anything. He naturally hoped that Princess Mingzhu would be stationed in the Sword Heart realm. That way, their defense line would be as stable as Mount Tai. However, for the sake of the big picture, some trade-offs were necessary. Also, don't say anything about what happened today. Don't tell anyone. Everything will wait until the Emperor God comes out of seclusion. After all, the fewer people who know about this chess piece, the better, Xiaoyang said. Li Fengmu and Li Chuanyi nodded one after another. Speaking of this matter, they felt a little embarrassed. How did their heavenly sword sect produce such a despicable person like Hu Beiguang? They also thought that they had not done anything wrong to Hu Beiguang, but he had done such a thing, which made them extremely disappointed. Regarding this matter, Li Fengmu did not intend to pursue it any further. After all, it would not be good news for anyone if things got out of hand at such a critical moment. In fact, it was very bad. Sword Masterly, please be careful. If you find that the wind is blowing in the wrong direction, give us a signal immediately so that we can coordinate with each other as soon as possible. This is to prevent any changes in the battle situation that might cause us to miss out on important matters, Xiaoyang said in a deep voice. Li Fengmu nodded and said, Don't worry, I can still do this. After discussing for a while, the four of them left to do their own things. Li Fengmu and Li Chuanyi had to deal with the aftermath of Hu Beiguang's incident, so it was naturally easy for them to appease the people. As for Princess Mingzhu, she headed straight for the flowing cloud realm. After all, Xiaoyang had been gone for a few days, and no one knew what was going on over there. In a small courtyard at the back of the mountain, it was full of peach trees. It was also the season for peach blossoms to bloom. A cool breeze blew past, sweeping up the petals as if fairies were dancing. Xiaoyang strolled leisurely in the peach forest. Looking at such a beautiful scenery, his expression gradually relaxed. Since coming to the Sword Heart realm, his nerves could be said to be tense again. This feeling could be said to be very bad. Fortunately, everything went according to their plan without any mishaps. Presumably, it wouldn't take long for them to understand the situation in the Myriad Beast realm. At that time, they would not have to be in fear every day, wondering when the other party would attack and when they would be caught off guard. The more he walked, the more Xiaoyang smelled an extremely strong smell of wine. Further ahead, he could see some wine jars, almost all of which were covered with a layer of peach blossoms. Xiaoyang's gaze quickly fell on a person. His white clothes were spotless, but his hair was messy and his face was even more unkempt. The man in white looked drunk, but he still held a jar of wine in his hand, as if he wanted to continue drinking, but he was a little drunk. This person was Bai Jian, who used to be arrogant, but now he was overshadowed. Xiaoyang did not disturb him. He sat opposite him and casually picked up a jar of wine. Without asking for the owner's permission, he took a sip. When it was almost evening, the wine jar in Bai Jian's hand was already covered with peach blossoms, and he slowly woke up. Bai Jian saw Xiaoyang through the gaps in his hair. He smiled and shook his head, then raised his head and drank a mouthful. I didn't expect our famous Lord Xiao to have time to visit me after killing third-level martial Emperor Realm experts, one after another. Bai Jian's voice sounded very weak. These days, Bai Jian had been drinking and making merry, and was lazy in his cultivation. Therefore, his vitality was damaged, which was why he was so listless. "Why can't I come and slack off?" Xiaoyang said with a smile. Bai Jian was stunned for a moment. Then he drank a few more mouthfuls. Perhaps because he could not calm down, he choked and coughed violently. Xiaoyang looked at him with a smile. However, he was extremely bitter in his heart. Bai Jian, who used to be high-spirited, had fallen to such a state. When Bai Jian came back to his senses, he saw that Xiaoyang was still laughing. He immediately mocked himself and said, "Why? Are you here to laugh at me? No matter how you look at it, it's not funny. I'm just here to drink with you, and you treat your friend like this? It seems that our friendship is just S.O." Xiaoyang said and waved his hand. Hearing this, Bai Jian's expression changed slightly. These days, there were many people who came to persuade him. However, no one said that they would drink with him. Could it be that Xiaoyang came here this time just to drink? A few days ago, Li Chuni came to me and said that the Sword Heart world was suffering because of the left blind and the right blind. So I came here. Since the matter is settled, I'm here to drink with an old friend and catch up with him. Is there a problem? Xiaoyang said. Bai Jian's eyes were still cloudy. Perhaps because he had drunk too much, his thoughts were a little slow. What did this have to do with him, Bai Jian? That's all? Bai Jian stuttered, obviously drunk again. That's all. Xiaoyang nodded firmly. Chapter 2305. Reuniting with an old friend and drinking with him was a joyous thing in life. Therefore, Xiaoyang did not try to persuade Bai Jian. After all, the more you tried to persuade him, the easier it would be for him to resist some setbacks. Therefore, sometimes it was enough to not say anything and just drink together. In the end, the two of them drank to their heart's content and passed out in the peach blossom forest. The next morning, Xiaoyang returned to the drifting cloud boundary alone. After all, he had left for several days. Although everything was calm, he had to be more vigilant. On the other side, Li Fengmu and Li Chuni came to the peach blossom forest. Looking at the drunk Bai Jian, they could not help but sigh. Could it be that this was something that could not be changed? Because of this, Li Fengmu felt even more uncomfortable. He did not leave out any of the methods and things that he could think of. However, that young man still could not recover. This made him feel bitter and hateful. Ancestor, is there any other way? Li Chuni asked helplessly. Li Fengmu shook his head. They had already come to this point. What else could he do? Give him more time. Li Fengmu shook his head and said. Now, Li Fengmu was indeed out of ideas. It could be said that inviting Xiaoyang over was the last resort. However, if this did not work, there was nothing he could do. Li Chuni, on the other hand, lowered his head in disappointment. He did not expect his senior brother, whom he respected, to be unable to recover from this setback. Moreover, they were at their wits' end. They did not know how to deal with it or how to help him. The past was still vivid in their minds, but some things had already changed. Moreover, such a change caused them to feel pity and helplessness. If they had any other ideas, they wouldn't have stayed in this place. The one who felt the most pain in his heart was none other than Li Fengmu. He had also watched Bai Jian walk step by step. It could be said that he had poured a lot of effort into him. It was a pity. Li Fengmu felt that it was a pity because the failure of a breakthrough was a huge blow to the Sky Sword Realm cultivators. Since the ancient times until now, how many seniors had died of depression and were unable to advance in the slightest in their entire lives? Back then, when Li Fengmu heard about the changes in the Thousand Thunder Realm, he immediately became furious and sent out a group of elites, itching to flatten the Thousand Thunder Realm. If it wasn't for the God Realm secretly persuading them to make peace, it wouldn't have been as simple as forcing some of the masterminds to death. The past is long, and it's hard to decide whether to leave or stay. There should be a way to help senior brother. Li Chunyi's eyes suddenly became resolute, because in Li Chunyi's opinion, his senior brother was an extremely powerful existence. How could he fall at this critical juncture? Li Fengmu smiled, his eyes filled with melancholy. He also wanted to do something to change all of this, but in the end he was still powerless. In the divine world, when the king heard about the series of events that happened in Swordheart Realm, he also became a lot more melancholy. It was an eventful time, and under the chaos of war, any kind of situation was possible. They could only wring their hands and sigh when some of the geniuses stopped. As for the other matters, they were practically all difficult to do. Second brother, will there be beasts that live off us and betray us in the divine world now? Qin Emperor walked over and asked. The king shook his head and said, at least there aren't any now. However, when the army of the Thousand Beast Realm invades the divine world, it's hard to say what the situation will be like. When these words came out, Qin Emperor's expression instantly became a lot more ugly. Because of the lesson that happened in Swordheart Realm, they had to be careful. Otherwise, when there really was a traitor in the divine world, to them, it was unknown what kind of terrifying loss there would be. If the traitor had a lot of information, then it would be even more unimaginable. Moreover, many things weren't absolute. No matter how good the atmosphere of a place was, it was inevitable that there would be scum. Seems like the divine world is also in imminent danger now. Qin Emperor said with a bitter smile, even though the flames of war hadn't spread over, one could see the whole leopard from a single spot. Flowing Cloud Realm and Swordheart Realm were somewhat exhausted when facing the invasion of a tribe. When the time came, if the Thousand Beast Realm attacked with full force, who knew what kind of terrifying thing would happen? Maybe the Flowing Cloud Realm and Swordheart Realm would be directly trampled. That wasn't impossible. However, as long as the God Emperor didn't come out of seclusion, it was hard for them to have a day of peace. They could only continue to wait like this. They could only hope that this matter wouldn't spread too quickly and give them more time to prepare. No need to be overly worried. When Big Brother comes out of seclusion, we can be more stable for the time being. However, I think that it's not a good idea to keep guarding the divine world. The king said with a bitter smile. Qin Emperor frowned slightly and said, since that girl Mingzhu went to the Flowing Cloud Realm, leave the Swordheart Realm to me. As for the safety of the divine world, it will depend on Second Brother. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. Now, you and Mingzhu have the highest realm. If you leave, then our divine world's defense. The king couldn't continue and could only sigh. Qin Emperor's eyes flickered. How to choose now was really a big problem. After Xiaoyang returned to the Flowing Cloud Realm, he started to set up the defense line again. Of course, this time he set up some formations that were hidden in the dark. When he was setting up these things, Xiaoyang brought along his confidants, such as Ji Fei and Shen Wushuang. As for the reason why he set up these things, it was very simple. Whether it was in the future, in terms of blocking or chasing, it would have an unexpected effect. When the time came, they would be caught off guard, and they might even be able to achieve the effect of annihilation. Of course, Xiaoyang also hoped that these arrangements could continue to stay hidden and never be used. And this method was learned from Baiwuxi. As the saying goes, a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows. You will never be able to guess where exactly I will make things difficult for you, or even completely cut off your escape route. In these days, Ji Fei had been following Xiaoyang and had made some progress. He sensed something and went into seclusion directly. Second-level Martial Emperor was in the bag. However, how long would it take to break through was another matter. However, now that Princess Mingzhu had returned, one less Martial Emperor expert wouldn't make much of a difference. Chapter 2306. 7 days had already passed by the time everything was set up. During this period of time, the Wanshou realm had not been affected at all. They were happy to have such peace. It was naturally a good thing to have more time to prepare and break through to the next realm. If they were constantly at war, they would only have fewer and fewer experts. Competing with the Wanshou realm in terms of resources was simply courting death. Fortunately, with Xiaoyang's decisiveness, although they had lost quite a number of peak martial king cultivators, all the martial emperors were safe. Not a single one of them had died. It could be said that most of the martial emperors stationed in the drifting cloud realm would have died in the previous battle if not for the convenience brought by the heart of the realm. A few more days passed, and Xiaoyang also felt that he was about to break through to the next realm. However, it was just a little bit away, and it made him feel a little irritated. Sometimes, even if it was just a little bit, it would take a long time to close the gap, especially for someone like Xiaoyang who had condensed 9 small spiritual meridians. Even a little bit of difference was huge. Even though Xiaoyang's state of mind was relatively stable, it was inevitable that he would feel a little irritated because of the current situation. Moreover, this feeling could be said to be very terrible. Therefore, he simply told himself to stop. Sometimes, if he forced himself to do something, he might make a bigger mistake. Back then, Bai Jian had been too anxious on the battlefield of the Western Plains, so he left behind a disaster that caused him to be unable to recover from the setback. Moreover, Xiaoyang's increase in strength now affected the prosperity of a realm. Therefore, he did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. He could only take it slow and did not dare to be anxious at all. A few more days passed, and he had completely calmed down. The problems in his state of mind were also slowly smoothed out. As long as there was no mistake in his state of mind, he only needed to do things step by step. Being anxious was necessary, but he could not spoil his state of mind because of this. At the same time, the divine realm also sent a new batch of reinforcements. This time, there were 2 familiar faces of Xiaoyang. They were the siblings, Xin Luo and Xin Fian. As for the Sword Heart world, it was Jiang Feiyun and the others who had just broken through. Seeing that Shen Luo and Xin Fian were different from before, Xiaoyang nodded with a satisfied smile. It could be said that almost all those who were ranked at the top of the Hidden Dragon ranking had already stepped into the Martial Emperor realm. However, days was indeed a bit slower. However, there was no need to hurry up and take it. After all, it was already not easy to be able to step into this realm. As long as he could walk to the beginning, then many things in the future would naturally be logical. "Long time no see, you too," Xiaoyang said with a smile. Xin Emo nodded with a smile and said, "Thank you for your advice back then, Brother Xiao. Back then, when we faced Lei Dingtian, we had no choice but to stand by and do nothing. Please don't blame us." Thinking about what had happened back then, Shinma couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Xiaoyang just smiled. What was there to pursue about the grudges of the past? Moreover, so what if Shin Luo had made a move back then? If he had really angered Lei Dingtian, he might not have been able to keep his life. Especially in the tomb of the god of sin where the rules were chaotic, anything could happen. It could be said that standing by and doing nothing was already the best way to do things. Shen Fian and Xiaoyang's expressions changed drastically as well. She also smiled self-deprecatingly. After the three of them exchanged pleasantries and reminisced about the past, they immediately headed to Summit Victory Mountain to coordinate the defense line. With the addition of 2 martial emperors, the Drifting Cloud Realm's defense could be said to have been greatly strengthened. Xiao Yang didn't go with them. Since Shan Wushuang and the old prime minister were there naturally wouldn't be any problems. On the contrary, he hadn't received any news from Blind Left and Blind Right yet, which made him feel a little uneasy. Although this place was far away from the Beast Realm, it wasn't too far away in terms of time. Moreover, so much time had passed, but there was no response from the White Bear tribe at all. This made Xiao Yang even more depressed. It wasn't that he wanted to start a war, but it was because the other party hadn't made a move yet. It was probably because they were brewing a bigger conspiracy. Perhaps the next attack would be something that they would not be able to resist at all. It was hard to say whether it would be a devastating blow. Xiao Yang had no choice but to think carefully about all of these. Moreover, that step had been difficult to take for a long time. Xiao Yang had no choice but to continue waiting. As for the God Realm, there was still no news. This was the most troublesome part. The God Emperor was the most powerful person. If he didn't show up for a long time, it might not be good news for everyone. Because the God Emperor had been in closed-door cultivation for a long time, some people began to figure out what was going on. Although the unrest in the army's morale was only a small part of it, it was still something to be wary of. As time passed, the small crack might become bigger and bigger. It was even possible that it would become an abyss in the end. Another few days passed, and suddenly, Xiao Yang's brows couldn't help but furrow. This was because he sensed that someone was coming. Moreover, the aura was very strange. At least he had never seen it before. In the next moment, Xiao Yang had already disappeared from his Raten chair and rushed towards West Wind City. This was because the aura didn't belong to the Four Realm Alliance, nor did it belong to the Beast Realm. Therefore, he wasn't sure if the person was a friend or foe. Therefore, he decided to make a trip himself to find out more about the situation. If he found out that it was an enemy, it would just be a battle. What was there to be afraid of? Of course, if they could become friends, that would be the best outcome. If the flowing cloud world continued to increase its number of enemies, it would be hard to predict what the consequences would be. On the way, Xiao Yang had already started to use the power of the world to check out the other party's background. However, the other party's methods weren't weak. As if they knew something, they deliberately covered it up, making it difficult for him to see the whole picture. Of course, this was also because Xiao Yang didn't want to expose certain things. Therefore, his observation was very natural and not deliberate. Otherwise, in the drifting cloud world, unless one possessed some sort of heaven-defying treasure or possessed a cultivation base that was terrifyingly high, one would not be able to escape his eyes. Very quickly, Xiao Yang passed by Westwind City and stopped on a plain. Before him stood a man. Chapter 2307. That person was 8 feet tall and looked very strong, just like a small mountain. Moreover, the aura that the person emitted was very strange. It made people feel cold, but it also made people feel like they would be burned to ashes under this coldness. Suddenly, a lot of information flashed through Xiao Yang's mind. Immediately, he smiled and cupped his fists. "Are you a friend from the In-Flame world?" This was the information that he found from the divine souls of Baiwuxi and the others. As for the person in front of him, he was a relatively famous existence in the In-Flame world. He had fought with Baiwuxi a few times and could be said to have one. To be able to wrestle with Baiwuxi and not be at a disadvantage at the same time, one could see how powerful this person was. Moreover, in the earliest plan, they had already decided to try to rope in the In-Flame world as their ally to fight against the Wanshou world together. However, the prerequisite was that the Divine Emperor had to come out of seclusion. Unexpectedly, the other party came first. The man was stunned for a moment, then he nodded and said, "Indeed." After speaking, the man's eyes began to wander quickly, sizing up the surrounding environment and the human cultivator standing in front of him. This was a brand new world, and the one in front of him was something that he had never seen before. Therefore, he couldn't help but be curious. What was the situation in this place, and how should he deal with it? These questions required more thought before he could come to a conclusion. Otherwise, if he acted rashly without any understanding of the general situation of this place, he would undoubtedly be courting death. Suddenly, Xiaoyang couldn't help but frown slightly, because what he saw and felt was a little strange, but there was some greed and covetousness in the other party's eyes. Although the Yin Flame world had always been fighting with the Wanshou world, the reason couldn't be clearly explained in a few words. Therefore, it was possible that the Yin Flame world and the Wanshou world were jackals of the same tribe. When the time came, it would be normal for them to conquer a world that was weaker than them. Sometimes, when a victim committed a crime, the consequences would be even worse than the former. As such, Xiaoyang already had a plan in his heart from the moment he breathed in and out. If they were just friends, then he would serve them with good food and drinks. If he was an enemy, he could only leave his corpse in the drifting cloud world. Moreover, his opponent was a third-level martial emperor. Even if Xiaoyang were to fight him alone, he would still be able to handle him. "Brother and Kun, I heard that the war between you and the Wanshou realm is in full swing," Xiaoyang suddenly said with a smile. Xiaoyang had obtained this person's life and all the information from Bai Wuxi's soul. It could be said that this person did not have many secrets from Xiaoyang. When the man heard this, his expression couldn't help but change. Previously, he was still pondering about the depth of this matter, but he didn't expect that this person already knew about his information. All this time, he had never heard of this world or this person. What exactly was going on? It made him feel a little gloomy. Because of these words, and Kun temporarily suppressed the thoughts in her heart. He also knew that since the other party already knew about his background, it could be seen how terrifying his methods were. Even if he was only a second-level martial emperor, he was still an existence that couldn't be underestimated. Therefore, it was not wrong to be more cautious. If he was careless because of this, who knew what kind of trouble would occur? Therefore, he couldn't be less vigilant in his heart. "You are?" And Kun asked hesitantly. Now, although Kun already had some plans in his heart and even deduced some problems in his heart, however, he found it a little hard to believe. Was there really such a powerful person in a newly promoted small world? Moreover, he had just set foot in this small world, but now he was facing the other party who came to stop him at the first moment. It was difficult for him to go in and find out more information. "I am from the drifting cloud world, which is the common master of this small world." Well, it's okay to explain it clearly to you. We were promoted to a medium world together under the joint efforts of the 4 small worlds. In the future, please take care of us, Xiaoyang said with a smile, and Kun's heart could be said to be extremely shocked, and at the same time the look in his eyes changed again. Since it was a newly promoted small world, wouldn't it be perfect to take it down and make it their backyard garden? However, what was happening now told him incomparably clearly that this matter was definitely not that simple. However, he could not pinpoint exactly what was wrong with it. Therefore, Kun was prepared to listen for a while more to see if he could find any clues from this. After all, only by knowing oneself and the enemy could one be victorious in 100 battles. Even if they were to start a war when the time came, they had to ensure that it was in the bag. Moreover, it would be best if they could take it down in one battle and make it all theirs. Otherwise, if the stalemate dragged on, the Wanshou world would know about this new territory, and the war between them would probably expand again. Therefore, Kun's heart was clear about which was more important and which was more important. Sometimes, taking over a small world wasn't as simple as plundering the resources. Moreover, in every world there was a certain amount of luck and opportunity. If they could win the battle, they could make it belong to them and use it to strengthen themselves. It could be said that the Wanshou world and the Yin Flame world had always followed this rule. It was only because the Wanshou world was stronger now that the Yin Flame world was passively attacked. They could only protect their own resources and didn't dare to relax at all. However, if there were any changes, they might as well change their strategy. And Kuhn's heart was already calculating quickly. The master of this small world was only a second-level martial emperor. From this, it could be inferred that this small world was indeed promoted from a small world. Its overall strength was probably very weak. As for the other small worlds, it should be about the same. This also made Kuhn feel that as long as his sect sent out 2 more experts, it would be enough to trample the 4-realm alliance under his feet. Or perhaps with more people, and Kuhn could command the battle. It might even be possible. Thinking of this, and Kuhn felt that a monstrous achievement was already placed in front of him. It seemed that whether his status could be raised in the future would depend on whether he could conquer this place. Chapter 2308. Looking at Kuhn's thoughtful posture, Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly, because what he saw was greed. Sure enough, it was not much different from what he expected. As a victim, the inflame world wanted to persecute him. In the 3,000 medium worlds, it could be said that the wars between the worlds had never stopped. Back then, the world here was drained and destroyed by the alliance of the inflame world and the beast world. After the subordinates of the tiger-wolf alliance ate the fat sheep, they inevitably felt hungry. As for the surroundings, there seemed to be no food, so they could only fight each other to see who could eat who in the end. Then, Xiaoyang took out a black robe and draped it over his body. When she saw the black-robed man, and Kuhn was stunned. He felt that what he saw with his own eyes was a little unreal. But he had fought with Bai Wuxi several times. How could he not recognize the black robe? That was Bai Wuxi's personal item, but now it had fallen into the hands of this young man. What was going on? If Bai Wuxi died in battle, it would be almost impossible to obtain the mystic black robe. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that the flowing cloud world and the beast world had already formed an alliance. If that was the case, then things had really become more complicated. This made Kuhn extremely shocked. The speed at which things were developing was a little too fast. No matter how he thought about it, the flowing cloud world and the beast world had formed a relationship. So the inflame world naturally did not have the possibility of being the first to get it. I think you also recognize this robe. Xiaoyang said with the corners of his mouth raised slightly. Since the other party did not come with good intentions, then naturally he had to beat them. Of course, it was not to the extent of starting a war directly. After all, it was already very difficult to deal with the White Bear tribe. If the beast world made a move, they might not be able to resist at all. So, if the inflame world joined in, the consequences might be even more terrifying. So, it would be best if they could settle things peacefully. And Kuhn swallowed a mouthful of saliva. After being asked, he could also confirm that the robe did belong to Bai Wuxi. What was going on? This caused Kuhn to have many doubts in her heart. Seeing the change in the other party's expression, Xiaoyang heaved a sigh of relief. Since the other party had already realized that something was amiss, they would naturally be wary. Next, it was time to listen to what he had to say. Bai Wuxi is indeed not bad. Whether it's his thoughts or his strength, he's at the top of the third-order martial emperor realm. Xiaoyang said with a smile. When he said this, Xiaoyang appeared very relaxed. After all, since he could kill Bai Wuxi back then, it was naturally because he was strong enough. Therefore, he was even more fearless when facing Kuhn. Even if it was only for the sake of the big picture. There were some things that, if one did not consider clearly, once it affected the overall situation, then the gains would not make up for the losses. It's just a pity that he thought too much and was killed by my sword. In the White Bear tribe, the number of third-order martial emperor realm experts killed by me is enough to fill one hand. Xiaoyang smiled and extended a hand with 5 fingers spread open. Immediately, Kuhn could not help but frown again. The other party said it very lightly, but from his expression, there was not the slightest falsehood. If that was the case, With Kun's strength and realm, it would be a fool's dream to take down this place with the strength of his tribe. Fellow cultivator, you're so skillful to be able to kill by Wuxi. You've really gotten rid of a big scourge for our Flame world. I can't thank you enough. And Kun immediately calmed down and smiled. Although the other party's words were somewhat true, since Bai Wuxi's black robe was taken away, it was enough to see what the result was. Therefore, the strength of the person in front of her was probably not to be underestimated. Therefore, it was better not to provoke him now. It was the most foolish decision to rashly start a war without knowing the enemy's situation. Looking at Kun's pretending to be calm, Xiaoyang felt a little funny. These people were all shrewd. If there was a mistake in his words, or if he made them feel that he was weak and could be bullied, they would probably attack him directly. Sometimes, if you showed your strength, then the other party would respect you. Otherwise, if you sometimes put harmony as the most important thing, the other party would only think that you were weak and could be bullied, or even take advantage of you. According to my understanding, your world is now being invaded by the myriad beast realm. We can be said to be the enemy of the enemy, so we can be friends. Xiaoyang said with a smile. Immediately, Kun's mind began to rapidly think. If they did not use some powerful people, it would be really difficult to take down the Four-Realm Alliance. Once they used it, if they could not take it down in a short time, the myriad beast realm would take advantage of the situation and invade. At that time, their Flame world might lose a large amount of land. Therefore, Kun was very helpless now. It seemed that no matter what choice she made, she could not maximize her benefits. Xiaoyang was not in a hurry. He waited quietly for a reply. However, he did not let his guard down. The Thunder Fire Divine sword was already in place. With just a thought, it would be unsheathed. You are really powerful. You killed Bai Wuxi with the strength of a second-level martial king. You are really a role model for our generation. And Kun said with a smile, but her eyes were fixed on Xiaoyang's face. It could be said that she was smiling insincerely. Being watched like this, Xiaoyang could not help but feel a little scared. However, he could only endure it. If they could really fight against the myriad beast realm together, it would definitely be great news for the drifting cloud world. After all, the enemy that had already started the war was only the myriad beast realm. I was just lucky. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly, and Kun shook her head and said, "How is that lucky? You don't have to be too modest. Otherwise, how can I endure it? I've exchanged blows with Bai Wuxi several times. Although it's said that I've exchanged blows with him, I know that I've always lost to him." At the same time, Kun laughed self-deprecatingly. Sometimes the truth was so cruel and true. Others might not be able to see it, but he knew it very well. It was just that he did not expect that his old enemy would fail miserably in the end. Chapter 2309. And Kun sized up the young man in front of him. He felt that he must have missed a lot of clues, which was why he was unable to discover how powerful the other party was. However, no matter how hard he thought about it, he did not think that Xiaoyang could kill Bai Wuxi. However, what exactly was going on? No matter in which aspect, Bai Wuxi was an invincible existence. Now he had lost his life here, which was somewhat illogical. However, since Bai Wuxi's mystic black magic robe had appeared in his hands, many of the problems in this matter became very clear. It was just that Kun found it difficult to accept such an outcome. He felt that it was too abnormal. If there was a chance, he could also go and understand the details. However, now that he was blocked at the edge of this world, it was almost impossible for him to go in and understand. Therefore, Kun was also thinking about this matter in his heart. After all, once he succeeded, he might face a meteoric rise or even go further. If there was a mistake in his judgment, he was afraid that the final result would be him asking for trouble. It was even possible that his reputation would be ruined because of this. Therefore, Kun had to be more careful. He did not even dare to show the slightest bit of carelessness in every detail. After all, if there was a mistake, the consequences would be unimaginable. How could there be so much luck? I'm sure brother must have some great methods. That's why you were able to kill by Wuxi and remove such a great calamity for my flame world. And Kun said with a face full of smiles. Since he already had some information, he couldn't be reckless. He could not even let the slightest mistake happen. Therefore, and Kun already had some plans in his heart. Xiaoyang was still very quiet about this, as if he had said something insignificant, so there was not much fluctuation in his emotions. Our flame world and the myriad beast world have been fighting for thousands of years. In these few decades, Bai Wuxi used countless schemes and tricks to make us suffer heavy losses. This time, I have to thank you for being able to get rid of this disaster, and Kun said with a smile. Now, and Kun began to ponder. No matter what, she had to go to Flowing Cloud World to take a look. If they hadn't wanted to invade our drifting cloud world, they wouldn't have ended up with their souls scattered, Xiaoyang said. The corner of Kun's mouth twitched subconsciously when she heard this. Just from this sentence alone, he could already sense many problems. Moreover, this person was extremely ruthless. Not only did he destroy his physical body, but he also destroyed his divine soul. From this, it could be seen that if a battle really broke out, whether or not he could keep his life was another matter altogether. Thinking of this, and Kun felt a headache coming on. Haha, since that's the case, then the enemy of my enemy is naturally my friend. If the Wanshou realm really invades the drifting cloud realm, our two realms can form an alliance and fight against the Wanshou realm together. And Kun said with a smile, although the overall strength of this small world didn't seem very powerful, they didn't know the real situation. Therefore, it was better to be cautious now. After all, some things were not groundless. Moreover, the attitude that the other party showed just now was already very clear. If they knew that there might be a mountain of blades and a sea of flames ahead and didn't investigate, clearly, they would be digging their own grave. Moreover, a small world that could fight against the White Bear tribe was probably not simple. Brother, and Kun is right. We also have the same thoughts. We're just afraid that you will look down on our weak small world, so we didn't disturb you, Xiaoyang said. And Kun shook his head indifferently and said, Since you can kill by Wuxi, it is enough to see how strong you are. Moreover, sometimes an alliance isn't based on strength, but because we have a common enemy. Makes sense, Xiaoyang replied, although they seemed to have reached a consensus in their echoes. However, the two of them were constantly calculating in their hearts to avoid making any mistakes. However, no one could be sure when the change would come, so they were testing each other. Since that's the case, please lead the way and let me see the drifting cloud realm. When the time comes, I will have a better understanding and report this matter to my master. When the time comes, once we form an alliance to fight against the enemies of the myriad beast realm, I think it won't take long for us to completely eradicate this big trouble. And Kun said with some vehemence. Now, and Kun looked like he had good intentions, but in his heart he had already started to plot. This was because he felt that this war would start sooner or later. It was just that he didn't have enough information, so he didn't dare to take the risk. However, now that he could walk in to understand it, it was naturally the best way to do it. It would depend on whether Xiaoyang had the courage to accept this overt scheme. If the other party didn't accept it, then it meant that he had a guilty conscience. At that time, he could directly drive the Flame Realm's army over and take down this place with lightning speed. Wouldn't that be perfect? Thinking like this, and Kun's heart also became a lot more excited. Success and recognition seemed to be within reach. Xiaoyang naturally also felt the difference in this, and he also began to plan quickly in his heart. Then Xiaoyang smiled and nodded, saying, Of course, since we're going to join forces to fight against the myriad beast realm, we naturally need to understand each other. Hearing this, a strange light flashed in Kun's eyes. Since the other party agreed, then it meant that he really had enough strength. But whether it was true or false, when the time came, he would naturally be able to see some clues. If he didn't even have the courage to take a look, then how could he talk about big things? Brother and Kun, just follow me. Today, I will specially lead you in. Otherwise, our drifting cloud realm is currently in a state of panic. It won't be good if there is some unhappiness because of this. Xiao Yang said with a smile. Due to the invasion of the White Bear tribe, their vigilance had been raised to the maximum. Of course, the meaning behind the sentence was also to warn Kun, to let him know that the drifting cloud realm wasn't so easy to infiltrate. Once he infiltrated, he would only face the interception of the local cultivators. That's good, that's good. And Kun said with a smile. However, Kun was very unhappy in his heart. He knew that it was definitely by Wuxi's method that made them more vigilant. Chapter 2310. Xiao Yang led the way in front, and Kun followed closely behind. Along the way, Xiao Yang was also very calm, and when he talked about some of the arrangements, he was even more straightforward. However, some of the arrangements were mostly calculated and changed in his heart, so that others would think that it was the most reasonable way to do it. After all, these arrangements were not a joke. Once others knew about it and came up with a plan to break it, it would be meaningless. It could be said that showing all the weaknesses was the most stupid way to do it. The reason why Xiao Yang told Kun this was very simple, and that was to let Kun know that the arrangements in the flowing cloud world were already as stable as an iron bucket, and it was difficult to break through. Therefore, it was impossible for them to use a blitzkrieg to quickly take down this place. When they passed by West Wind City, Kun couldn't help but frown, and said, "This is the first line of defense, and the guard should be even tighter. Why are there so few people?" Could it be that the arrangement of this line of defense looked brilliant, but it was just for show? Therefore, Kun also had some doubts about this. If this was the case, then it could be seen that the flowing cloud world was indeed not taken down by Wuxi because of luck. Take a look again. Isn't this city a pocket? Xiao Yang's lips curled up slightly as he said. Hearing this, Kun looked down and immediately saw the reason. It seemed that there was indeed some meaning behind it. At that time, if they were not careful, they would be surrounded and then beaten up. Immediately, Kun was shocked. Such an arrangement was indeed very terrifying. It seemed that this person was indeed very scheming. Soon after, Kun laughed self-deprecatingly. Since he could scheme against Wuxi with the cultivation of a second-level martial emperor, it was obvious how capable he was. Therefore, there was no doubt about it. However, Kun was still worried about whether Wuxi was killed or not. After all, it was still somewhat difficult for him to accept the fact that his old enemy had been completely annihilated in body and soul. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that it was somewhat unreal. It was just that Xiao Yang had been leading him all this time, so he couldn't investigate in detail. He could only feel depressed. As they continued forward, they naturally arrived at Pine Victory Mountain, replacing West Wind City and Spring Sun City as the first line of defense. When Kun saw Pine Victory Mountain, she suddenly realized, sensing some of the auras in the mountains, he knew that this was the real first line of defense. If they couldn't break through the Taste Victory Mountain, then everything would become wishful thinking. Therefore, they had to be careful when dealing with such matters. What a great move! Brother Xiao, you are really scheming. Kun swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said emotionally. Previously, Kun still held onto a sliver of hope and invited the two supreme beings to come. When the time came, they would take down the flowing cloud realm as quickly as possible. At that time, even if the Wanshou realm came, so what? As long as they could set up a line of defense, it would be enough to stop them from advancing any further. Based on the current situation, the current Yin Flame realm was naturally able to take down the flowing cloud realm. However, doing so was extremely risky. Once the Wanshou realm noticed and launched an all-out attack, it would be difficult for them to defend due to the lack of powerhouses to hold the fort. As a result, there was a tripartite balance of power between the three realms. However, the four-realm alliance was the weakest side and had almost no power to choose. When Shen Wushuang and the others saw that Xiao Yang had brought a stranger over, They greeted him one after another, but didn't ask much. After all, this was something that they needed to know. Xiao Yang wouldn't hide it from them. Immediately after, Xiao Yang continued forward with Kun and arrived at the second line of defense, the two cities led by Chu Taiyin and Xiao Changxing. After seeing these two cities, Kun's heart was completely filled with despair. These two cities formed a triangle and could even reinforce Pine Victory Mountain in time. It could be said that they were one entity. However, from this, it could be seen that Pine Victory Mountain was the first and only line of defense. As long as Pine Victory Mountain didn't fall, the Flowing Cloud Realm would be safe and sound. On the other hand, if Pine Victory Mountain were to fall, the realm would naturally have no ability to resist. While chatting, Kun also got more information. This was the Four Realms Alliance, a medium world formed by the union of four small worlds. Moreover, the Flowing Cloud Realm was only the weakest realm in the Four Realm Alliance. How strong would the other three realms be? Thinking about these questions, Kun couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. Initially, he thought that it would be enough to understand a part of it. However, who would have thought that this was just the beginning? It would take a lot of effort just to take down the Flowing Cloud Realm. When the time came, they would have to take down the other three realms as well. No matter how he looked at it, it wouldn't be an easy task. Lord Xiao is truly a great strategist. You've seen through everything. Your arrangements are flawless. It's admirable. Kun smiled and cupped his fists as he flattered Xiao Changxing. Now, Kun's heart also felt a little lucky. Fortunately, he didn't act rashly. Otherwise, it would only lead to a disaster in the end. However, when the time came whether they would work together with the Flowing Cloud Realm to deal with the Wanshou realm or go to war, these weren't things that Kun could decide alone. He could only bring this information back and let his master make the decision. You're flattering me, Xiao Yang replied indifferently. Soon after, the two continued to move forward to look at other places in the Flowing Cloud Realm. After a few days, Kun finally walked through the entire Flowing Cloud Realm and understood the general situation. From the information that he obtained through some small means, Kun was frightened. The God Realm was much stronger than the Flowing Cloud Realm. Moreover, most of the garrison troops were from the God Realm. Since that was the case, then how powerful was the God Realm in the center? Could it be that their strength wasn't inferior to the Yin Flame Realm? However, because of the war, Kun couldn't go to the God Realm to obtain information. In the end, Kun could only say a few perfunctory words and report back to Lord Xiao Changxing. Then he would decide whether to form an alliance to deal with the Wanshou realm together. However, when Kun left, he clearly hinted that the possibility of them working together to deal with the Wanshou realm was very high. Chapter 23:11. After sending Kun off, Unrivaled God, Chu Nanfeng, and the rest quickly rushed over. They were very wary of this outsider. They had not been in a hurry to investigate earlier because Xiao Yang had led them there. Now that the guest had left, they naturally wanted to find out more. It would be easier to find out more about the other party. That person's name is Kun from the Yin Flame world. Although he's made it clear that he wants to join forces with us to fight against the 10,000 Beast Realm, I don't think it's possible. However, I feel that this matter is not as simple as it seems. Xiao Yang frowned slightly and explained the information he had obtained in the most concise way possible. Everyone began to make their own plans when they heard that. Although they had indeed planned to join forces with the Yin Flame world, they had not done so on their own accord. However, it wasn't because they had taken the initiative to visit. Instead, the other party had unintentionally discovered the Flowing Cloud Realm. If that's the case, Kun followed Lord Xiao into the drifting cloud world to find out what's going on. If that's the case, it'll be easier for them to plan if they can take down our four-realm alliance quickly. I'm afraid they're as ambitious as the 10,000 Beast Realm, the old Prime Minister said with a helpless laugh. They were all experienced people who had lived for thousands of years. Naturally, they could see things more clearly and understand where the truth was. They would even accept the worst possible outcome instead of imagining how much benefit the other party would bring them. Everyone could not help but sigh when they heard that. From the looks of it, the Flame world might not be an ally but an enemy. Will the 10,000 Beast Realm and the Flame world join forces? Unrivaled God suddenly asked. Hearing this, everyone's eyebrows immediately furrowed together. Although the 10,000 Beast Realm and the Flame world had been at war for thousands of years, there had not been a clear winner in these thousands of years. It could be deduced that the difference in their abilities was not that great. Although there were many grudges between them, they were not worth mentioning in the face of absolute benefits. Moreover, they had 4 mini-worlds. If they joined forces to take down the drifting cloud world, they would be able to divide it evenly. After the 4 Realms Alliance was completely destroyed, it was not impossible for them to continue fighting until the outcome of the battle was decided. The angle of this idea was very tricky. It was also the worst-case scenario. However, it was not impossible for them to join forces because of the benefits. It was just that the probability of this happening was relatively small. After all, the strength of both sides was not weak. They both believed that as long as they sent out a few mighty figures, it would be enough to take him down. At that time, who would be willing to share a piece of the pie with others? The cruelty of the middle world could be said to be extremely terrifying. As long as it was not a last resort, no one would be willing to do it. It could be said that the conflict between the Flame realm and the Beast realm had a subtle relationship because of the appearance of the 4 Realm Alliance. Although it had not affected the overall situation yet, it was only because they did not place their attention on it. Once they knew that there was a 4 Realms Alliance here, things might change because of this. We have to guard against this as well. However, if that's the case, I'm afraid our path will be even more difficult in the future. Xiaoyang said and sighed helplessly. Even though the probability of that happening was extremely low, it was still possible. Furthermore, they could not afford to be careless. These are truly troubled times. Chu Nanfeng gritted his teeth and said, previously, they thought that after coming to the middle world, they would be able to cultivate in peace without the restriction of fate. Then, they would walk step by step until they reached the peak. However, who would have thought that they would face endless invasions from the beginning? In fact, their opponents were much stronger than them. Even self-preservation seemed to be a bit far-fetched. Xiaoyang said, we don't have to be so pessimistic. If we can really join forces with the Flame realm, the pressure against the Beast realm will naturally be reduced. Of course, this was the most logical thing to do. At the very least, given the current situation, such a direction of development was human nature. Indeed, perhaps when the God Emperor comes out of seclusion, our situation will usher in earth-shattering changes. The old Prime Minister said with a smile. It could be said that all their hopes were now on the God Emperor. If he could break through to the 4th level Martial Emperor realm as soon as possible, the overall strength of the 4 Realm Alliance would undergo a qualitative change. At least, when facing the invaders from the outside world, they would have the power to resist and not fall into despair directly. Shen Luo and Xin Fian were a little confused because they had just come out of seclusion and did not understand the current situation very well. Immediately after, everyone discussed for a while and then returned to their respective stations. As time went on, everyone felt as if a knife was raised in their hearts, but it did not fall. It had been a long time since Bai Wuxi was killed, but the White Bear tribe did not seem to have any reaction. This made them feel as if a storm was coming. After all, the later they took action, the more likely they were to have planned this. Therefore, under such a situation, it was very torturous. Even Xiaoyang felt that he was about to collapse. Under such a state of high tension, many people would inevitably become more irritable. Xiaoyang's mental fortitude was outstanding. Otherwise, there would have been problems with his mentality long ago. In the divine capital of the divine world, there were some changes again. In the imperial palace, 2 golden lights soared into the sky. Looking in the direction of the lights, it was the imperial palace. King Da and King Qin were discussing the in-flame world when they saw the lights that soared into the sky. Instantly, the corners of their mouths curled into smiles. With just a glance, they already knew what each other was thinking. Other than Princess Mingzhu, only the God Emperor would be able to create such a scene. Now, with such a phenomenon, didn't it mean that the God Emperor had broken through and stepped into the fourth-level Martial Emperor realm? With such a thought, their hearts became more and more excited. If the God Emperor came out of seclusion and he came to oversee the situation, then the people's hearts would be united to the greatest extent. At that time, they might even be invincible. Big Brother is Big Brother, always walking in front of us. Even if that girl Mingzhu is blessed with luck, she can't compare to Big Brother's talent. King Qin sighed with emotion. Back then, the God Emperor was able to break through to the second-level Martial Emperor realm in the 3,000 small worlds and suppress his realm from ascending. Chapter 23:12. The smile on King Da's face deepened. It could even be said that everyone in the God realm who could see the golden light was extremely excited. Some of the core figures even shed tears. They knew very well how important the breakthrough of the God Emperor was to the God realm. Whether the God realm could gain a foothold in the 3,000 medium worlds in the future would depend on the God Emperor. However, there was another change. The two golden lights suddenly dimmed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Everyone thought that everything was over and a new beginning was about to arrive. They desperately wanted an answer. However, after the time it took to brew a cup of tea, nothing happened. Even after the time it took for an incense stick to burn, and 2 hours had passed, the palace was still incomparably quiet. There was still no news of the God Emperor's breakthrough. After a day had passed, countless people fell into despair. Could it be that the God Emperor had a problem during his breakthrough, and that was why he failed? But what about the golden light that soared into the sky? What was that all about? What kind of unforeseen event happened to cause this? If the God Emperor had really succeeded in his breakthrough, he would naturally come out to preside over the situation. However, he did not appear. What was the result? Everyone could not help but wonder. Moreover, if the God Emperor made a mistake during his breakthrough, the consequences would not be hard to predict. Therefore, a storm was set off in some people's hearts. Fortunately, this news was sealed within the divine capital and did not continue to spread. Otherwise, if this news were to spread, the morale of the Four Realm Alliance's army would be completely shattered. They might even lose their fighting spirit and be enslaved by others in the end. As long as their hope was not extinguished, everyone would continue to fight. Once they lost all hope, it would be a total defeat. The king sat on the ground with a solemn expression. His eyes were almost devoid of any light. King Qin directly fell to the ground and looked at the ceiling in disbelief. The Big Brother in their hearts had actually failed this time. Moreover, it had happened at such a critical juncture. As such, how could they accept such an outcome? Your Highnesses, we don't have to worry too much. As long as the God Emperor hasn't come out of his seclusion, this matter will not be settled. Maybe it was just a small accident. Jiang Zhangqing comforted. However, his words were a little incoherent. It was obvious that he was not very confident. This was not because they were pessimistic, but because at this level they could naturally understand a lot of things. Furthermore, a single failure was extremely terrifying. Take Bai Jian of the Sword Heart Realm, for example. He was the hope of the Sword Heart Realm, but because of one failure he became a drunkard. Zhao Wang calmly poured himself a cup of tea and said, "So what if Big Brother fails? Do we have to stretch out our necks and wait for others to chop off our heads if he fails?" The Duke of Da and the Duke of Qin rolled their eyes at him. They were extremely displeased. At this time he was still making sarcastic remarks. It was simply unreasonable. No matter what the situation is now, it's just our guesses. Why take it so seriously? Moreover, I think Princess Mingzhu and Xiaoyang are not bad. They just need some time to grow. I also believe in my Big Brother. He won't disappoint us. King Zhao put down his teacup and said, "Then, King Zhao slowly stood up and looked out the door. He seemed to be lost in thought. However, your current performance has disappointed me. After he finished speaking, King Zhao quickly walked out. It was as if he did not want to stay here any longer. He was afraid that the negative emotions of these people would affect him. At this moment, Jiang Zhangqing was also a little depressed, because he felt that his ability was really not enough. After a long time, the Duke of Qin slowly stood up and said, "Second brother, it's really not appropriate for us to be like this. If our ambitions are lowered, how can the enormous God realm and the allies of the three realms endure? No matter whether Big Brother succeeds or not, we have to continue living." The Duke of De could only smile bitterly. It was unknown whether it was because there were too many things during this period of time, but he was practically suffocating from the pressure. Therefore, he just wanted to sit like this and rest for a while. At this juncture, the calmest person was Zhao Wang. He sealed all the news with extreme speed to prevent it from spreading. Of course, some of the core members did not hide anything. They told them everything. After all, everyone knew what to do in their hearts. There was no need for unwarranted luck. As for the future survival of the Four Realms Alliance, it would depend on everyone's battle. It would not depend on the strength of one person. After all, the God Emperor was only a person. He was not a true God. He was not an omnipotent existence. He would also face some setbacks. After Xiaoyang learned that the God Emperor was very likely to fail in his breakthrough, his expression became a lot more solemn. Currently, Xiaoyang's cultivation progress could be said to be very slow. If the opponent was only one realm higher, then he would be able to fight without fear. However, what about one realm higher? If that was the case, then it would be somewhat difficult. Of course, saying that it was difficult was a better way to put it. There was a difference of 2 realms, and that was not a small difference at all. In other words, because of the suspected unforeseen event in the divine capital, the last bit of hope they had was destroyed. Although Xiaoyang would face everything alone from the beginning to the end, he still felt somewhat helpless when he thought about the possibility of the God Emperor's failure. After all, he could indeed suppress the current situation. However, as the incoming opponents became stronger and stronger, he could not say for sure how long he could hold on. There were many unforeseen events that could not be explained in a few words. It seems that the days ahead will not be easy. Whether the flowing cloud realm can still be defended is a mystery. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. Now he also realized that the development of these events was simply too fast. It caught him unprepared. Hope and accidents. In the end, accidents came first. Suddenly, Xiaoyang felt his waist tremble. He hurriedly took out a token. After seeing the information that appeared on the token, Xiaoyang's expression became even more solemn. When it rains, it pours. What will come will come. There is no avoiding it. Chapter 23:13. The message on the token was sent by the Grey Wolf tribes, Left Blind and Right Blind. The 2 of them had returned to the Myriad Beast realm and were not punished by the White Bear tribe due to their severe injuries. Instead, they received some compensation due to their severe losses. However, that little bit of compensation was nothing. Compared to the things that Xiaoyang had given him, it was a little unpresentable. Of course, the White Bear tribe was like this. He felt that it was an honor for them to be able to reward them with something. What right did they have to choose? After avoiding the White Bear tribe's pursuit, the 2 of them returned to their own tribe and carefully inquired about the news. The news they received this time was very simple. The White Bear tribe's White Bear tribe had a powerful expert who had returned, and the 2 of them had joined forces to come to the flowing cloud world. The 2 of them were 4th Order Martial Kings, and one of them was even close to 5th Order Martial Kings. It was hard to say whether or not he had made further progress, and it was not something that the 2 of them could find out. After receiving this news, the huge stone in Xiaoyang's heart became heavier. This time, the White Bear tribe had mobilized more than half of their forces. Even a 4th Order Martial King realm expert had been dispatched. One had to know that the information Xiaoyang received was very simple. The White Bear tribe only had 2 or 3/4 order martial kings. Now, they had mobilized 2 of them. It was as if they were going all out. Whether the flowing cloud world could stop them had become a huge problem. Although Princess Mingzhu had returned to the flowing cloud world, their strength was still barely comparable to the White Bear tribe. In fact, it was almost an undefeatable existence. Therefore, Xiaoyang felt a headache coming on. If he could improve his cultivation level, he would not need to be afraid. However, he was still unable to take that half a step. My luck is really indescribable. Can it be any worse? Xiaoyang said in a self-deprecating manner. Now he really did not have a solution. This was just like how the cleverest housewife couldn't cook without rice. It was too difficult to deal with it. Therefore, Xiaoyang had to first think about it in his heart before he could reveal this information. Otherwise, if they were all in despair, there would be no need to fight anymore. Therefore, Xiaoyang had to think of a way to change the situation and find hope. As for whether or not the information from blind left and blind right was true and reliable, this was something that needed to be investigated. However, after some time, they would know whether it was true or not. Of course, this could also verify the reliability of the 2 spies. If they dared to have crooked thoughts, Xiaoyang wouldn't mind crushing the imprint and sending their souls to the Yellow Springs. If he really couldn't think of a solution at that time, then there was no other way. He could only fight to the death. At that time, there would be no harm in exposing all those hidden things. After all, being able to survive was the most important thing. If a trump card really became a trump card and couldn't be used, that would be the most tragic thing. Sword Heart World, in a peach blossom forest of sky, Sword Mountain. A young man with unkempt hair and a dirty face suddenly sat up from the countless flower petals. His eyes were dull as he looked at the many jars of wine, absent-mindedly. Bai Jian had stayed in the peach blossom forest for a long time and drank a lot of wine. Therefore, even when the jars were connected together, they could almost form a tall wall. It was extremely majestic. Then Bai Jian slowly came back to his senses and looked at the peach blossom trees. The peach blossoms had almost all fallen, and some unripe fruits had started to grow out one after another. The youth in white staggered to his feet. However, before he could take 2 steps, he stumbled as if he was still drunk. He lost his balance and even knocked into a wine jar. Si li hua la. The sound of something shattering could be heard one after another. After hearing the sound, Li Chuni quickly rushed over. He was afraid that something would happen to his senior brother. Although many people had completely given up on Bai Jian, Li Chuni felt that his senior brother would not collapse. The current decadence was only temporary. Everything will pass. After Bai Jian stood up, he saw Li Chuni and smiled. Senior brother, are you okay? Li Chuni asked carefully. The current Bai Jian seemed to be a little different. Therefore, Li Chuni was also very curious. Would he wake up now? Bai Jian shook his head violently and looked like he was in pain. He did not answer and only glanced at his junior brother. There was no change in his eyes, as if he was still drunk and in a daze. Bai Jian stumbled over and completely ignored Li Chuni. This made Li Chuni feel a little helpless. He was silent, so he knew that his senior brother had not woken up. Senior brother, you don't have to get the wine yourself. I can do it for you. Li Chuni sighed. Bai Jian waved his hand and said, I've drunk enough. Hearing this, Li Chuni could not believe his ears. He looked at the back of the figure who could barely walk steadily, and his heart was greatly moved. Could it be that his senior brother had already walked out? Although he still had no essence, energy, and spirit, it might only be because he drank too much. As long as he rested for a period of time, he would naturally be able to recover. Bai Jian had only taken a few steps when he was blocked by Li Fengmu. Grandmaster, why are you blocking my path? Bai Jian raised his head carelessly and said with a smile, without any respect for seniority, Li Fengmu was not angry and said, "I just want to know where you're going." No matter where Bai Jian wanted to go, Li Fengmu would not say anything. He would even follow him personally to ensure his safety. As long as he could walk out of this shadow, then everything would no longer be a problem. Sword Scarabus, Bai Jian said with a smile. As soon as these words came out, Li Fengmu and Li Chunyi's expressions immediately became much more solemn. They never thought that the first place Bai Jian wanted to go was the number 1 forbidden area of their Sword Heart world. Sword Scarabus! Grandmaster, please don't stop me and don't follow me. Let me go down and take a look. After saying that, Bai Jian continued to stumble forward. It was as if at this moment Bai Jian's state of mind had been settled and was irreversible. Ancestor, aren't you going to persuade senior brother? Li Chunyi said in disbelief. Li Fengmu shook his head and said that's the path he chose. Chapter 23:14. All of a sudden the situation changed. The various forces also began to make different arrangements. Because of some accidents, they had to adjust their plans. Otherwise, it would be no different from sitting and waiting for death. However, it was not easy to protect oneself with limited resources. It was not an exaggeration to say that everyone was in danger. On the contrary, Xiaoyang was not worried at all about the flowing cloud world, which was the main battlefield. Usually, she would just plant some flowers and raise some grass in her small courtyard. When he had nothing to do, he would go out for a walk to see if there were any flaws or mistakes. He would check and fill in the gaps, constantly strengthening the overall defense and counterattack ability. Although these small decorations did not seem to resonate with the taste Victory Mountain, once the flowing cloud world fell and these things were revealed, it would be a different story. Moreover, there were many ways and wonderful uses in this. Xiaoyang also hoped that he would not have the chance to use them, but he had to be prepared. Now, the future could be said to be uncertain, and no one knew what would happen, especially after receiving the information from Blind Left and Blind Right. Xiaoyang became more and more worried. After all, the other party had sent out 2 Almighty 4th level Martial Emperor, which was really difficult to resist. However, this was still considered good news. As long as the other tribes of the Wanshou realm did not interfere, they would still be able to put up a fight. He was afraid that when the other party came out in full force, it would be a fool's dream if the flowing cloud world still wanted to resist. Right now, Xiaoyang could be said to be extremely helpless. Who would have thought that the world would change so quickly, and it would even catch people off guard? On the other side, Sun Dishing and Sun Yukai also increased the intensity of the distribution of resources, because the next battle might be the last battle. Before that, if they could increase the strength of more people, then naturally they would have a higher chance of winning. Although it was inevitable that this meant that they were pulling the seedlings to help them grow, there was no other way. After all, they could only struggle and resist now. Whether they succeeded or not depended on luck. During this period of time, Xiaoyang didn't ignore everything. Instead, he began to learn how to control the drifting cloud realm from the world spirit. After all, there were still many powers in this world that he could not control. Proficiency was also very important. If Huang Xiaolong hadn't stepped into the Third Order Martial Emperor realm when the White Bear tribes Almighty invaded, he wouldn't have been able to fight against a Fourth Order Martial Emperor realm expert. Therefore, the force of the realm became the only thing he could rely on. Moreover, this was an absolutely indispensable part. If he could step into the next realm as soon as possible, then he would no longer have to fear the White Bear tribe. However, how could there be so many logical things in this world? There were many things that could not be settled with just a few words. Therefore, Xiaoyang had no choice but to do this. It could also be said that this was the only way out. After a few days, Xiaoyang had also become more familiar with controlling the power of the world, although it was still a little lacking. However, such progress was not bad at all. As for the world spirit, Xiaoyang did not tell his other allies. This was because he had also tried to feel the Sword Heart world or the God Realm's world heart. However, he did not know if there was a taboo or something else, but he could not feel it. Of course, there was a greater possibility that the world spirit had never existed from the beginning to the end, and that would be the case. These were not things that Xiao Yang could care about at the moment. After all, how to withstand the White Bear tribe's wrath was the most important thing. After a few days, Ji Fei successfully broke out of closed-door cultivation and became the second-order martial emperor in the drifting cloud realm. Xiao Yang also breathed a sigh of relief because of Ji Fei's breakthrough. If Shen Wushuang and Ji Fei worked together to control the 10,000 Hearts joint formation, then the Taste Victory Mountain would not be broken so easily. It seems that we're quite lucky this time. I was able to break out of closed-door cultivation in time, Ji Fei said with a chuckle. Now that he had reached a higher realm, Ji Fei was in a good mood. At least, compared to before, the realm that he had never dreamed of had become a reality. Moreover, Ji Fei also felt that this was only the beginning. There was still a long way to go, and he might be able to elevate himself to a higher realm. When that time came, perhaps everything would become a reality instead of an extravagant hope. Xiao Yang smiled and nodded, saying, "I'm relieved that you've come out of closed-door cultivation." Previously, Xiao Yang could not do anything on his own. However, now that Princess Mingzhu had returned, coupled with Shen Wushuang and Ji Fei's successive breakthroughs, the drifting cloud realm's apparent strength had been greatly strengthened. Moreover, he did not have to take care of everything no matter what. However, my breakthrough won't affect too much. Therefore, the key lies with you and Princess Mingzhu, Ji Fei said with a sigh. It could be said that the gap between them could not be explained in a few words. Moreover, the meaning of their existence was even more different. In the end, Xiao Yang could only laugh helplessly and bitterly. It was difficult for anyone to make a decision on such a matter. "Don't think too much about it. We'll just have to deal with whatever comes our way," Xiao Yang said, pretending to be relaxed. Xiao Yang did not tell Ji Fei about the White Bear tribe's upcoming revenge. After all, as a hidden chess piece, there were times when he had to put on an act to conceal himself. If he had to, once the chess piece in the Wanshou realm was discovered, the drifting cloud realm would still suffer a greater loss in the end, and not their opponents. "I'm much more relieved to hear that," Ji Fei said, the smile at the corner of his mouth growing wider. As long as the backbone did not panic, they would definitely be confident in dealing with the situation. Even if the war was cruel, it was not to the extent that they had no chance of winning. "Should I go to Summit Victory Mountain next?" Ji Fei asked after a moment of hesitation. Xiao Yang nodded quickly and said, "You and Shen Wushuang will guard the front together." After the two of them talked for a while, Ji Fei left for Summit Victory Mountain. It could be said that the drifting cloud realm had almost reached the point where every tree was an enemy. No one could say for sure when the war would start again. Therefore, the only thing they could do was to be on high alert and eliminate all risks. At least, they would not be caught off guard and directly defeated. Chapter 23:15. At the beginning of the 7th year of the new era, he received his first piece of good news. Before the White Bear tribe's army arrived, Mu Yang had brought Baldi and Chen Mingho back to the flowing cloud realm. When Xiao Yang sensed their auras, he felt much more relieved. Furthermore, from their auras, he knew that Mu Yang was now a second-level martial king. Even Baldi and Chen Mingho had broken through their shackles and stepped into the martial king realm. As a result, the originally weak flowing cloud realm had become much stronger because of their return. It could be said that the flowing cloud realm had the least martial kings before. However, because of their return, it had also become a realm below the god realm. After Mu Yang returned, the first thing he did was to go to Xiao Yang's residence and report the situation. After all these years of traveling, Mu Yang had become much smoother. Many of his edges had been completely smoothed out, and he was no longer the same as before. When the three of them arrived in front of Xiao Yang, they were all very excited. This was because they had gained a lot from this trip. Boss, you don't know how incredible the cultivators in the Enflame realm are. Baldy was also very excited as he talked about what he had seen and heard outside. Xiao Yong only laughed it off. Naturally, he knew about these things. From the White Bear tribe's experts and in Kun, he knew a lot about these things. It seemed that in these few years, Mu Yang and the other two had been in the Enflame realm to train and gather information. If they had returned earlier, this would have been more meaningful. But now, this information wasn't of much use. After hearing Xiao Yang talk about the situation in the Enflame realm, Baldy and Qin Mingho were dumbfounded. Boss, you're so good at divination? How do you know so much about these things? Baldy's jaw was about to hit the ground. He felt that this was too shocking. That was because they had not even mentioned a single word about these matters. In the end, it was Xiao Yang who spoke of them clearly. It's not that I can predict, but after you left the Flowing Cloud realm, many things happened. We have already formed a grudge with the White Bear tribe in the Thousand Beast realm. I think it won't be long before some powerful beings come to invade the Flowing Cloud realm. The crisis we are facing is also very difficult to deal with. As for the matter of joining forces with the Enflame world to fight the enemy, it will be put aside for now, Xiao Yang said with a bitter smile. Mu Yang stood at the side, his expression extremely ugly. Even now, he felt that the information he had gathered was meaningless. Instead, when the Flowing Cloud world was invaded, he wasn't there to protect it with his companions. Suddenly, Mu Yang let out a self-deprecating laugh. After all, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. Who could accurately predict the changes in the situation? This trip of yours is not completely meaningless. At the very least, your strengths and realms have increased. It is enough for you to return when the Flowing Cloud realm needs you the most. Xiao Yang smiled. Now that there were 3 second-order martial emperors, when the time came, the 3 of them would work together to defend the Triumph Mountain. They would be able to strengthen the line of defense. Moreover, they would be able to make their tactics more flexible and not be too rigid, which would cause them to be led by the nose. Hearing this, Mu Yang's mood improved a little, and he said, "The harvest this time was not bad. I am only half a step away from the 3rd-order martial emperor." Instantly, Xiao Yang's heart could not help but tremble. Mu Yang's attainments and formations were not to be underestimated. Back then, when he used the sky circulation formation to help Xiao Yang fight against Han Jingming, it could be seen. Therefore, when the time came with him, their strength would increase by a lot. This was not a simple fantasy, but a fact. If Mu Yang could successfully enter the 3rd-order martial emperor, then he would not have to worry about the line of defense at the Triumph Mountain. When the time came, Xiao Yang would be able to do whatever he wanted, and he would not be restrained. "Senior, it seems like the opportunity this time is not small," Xiao Yang said with a smile. Mu Yang also smiled. He did not expect that there would be a day when he could catch up to or even surpass Mu Yang in terms of realms. "Xiao Yang, if you want to form an alliance with the Enflame world, you have to think twice. After all, that world is not a kind one. I heard that the middle world here was destroyed by the alliance of the Myriad Beasts world and the Enflame world." Mu Yang thought for a moment and said, Xiao Yang did not know about this. However, now that he knew, he naturally had to think more before making a decision. After all, they might be able to maintain their position as allies now. But who knew if they would start a war because of their wild ambitions? Once there was an alliance, the wariness in their hearts would inevitably disappear. At that time, if they were caught off guard, their losses would be even more terrifying. The more he thought about it, the more serious Xiao Yang's expression became. It seemed that the Enflame world was indeed unreliable, and they might become a vicious wolf that would tear them apart at any time. I never thought that the rules of the 3,000 small worlds would be so cruel. The bald man could not help but sigh, and he said, helplessly, "In the 3,000 small worlds, wars between worlds would erupt. However, everyone would know when to stop. However, there were very few people like this. If someone did this, they would probably become the public enemy of the 3,000 small worlds. However, in this place, such actions were very normal, and that was the most terrifying part. The difference naturally meant that there was a different atmosphere. I can't make a decision on this alone. I can only wait for the God Emperor to come out of seclusion. Xiao Yang smiled bitterly. However, he already had a plan in mind. Forming an alliance with the Flame world to deal with the Myriad Beasts world was imperative. He also knew that this was like asking a tiger for its skin. Once the Myriad Beasts world was gone, the Flame world would probably come back to deal with them immediately. However, they were still a little weak at the moment, and they needed a helper like the Flame world. Otherwise, it would be too much for them to deal with the Myriad Beasts world alone. When the time came, forming an alliance was imperative, but at the same time they had to be on their guard. If that was the case, forming an alliance might just be a verbal agreement, and whether or not they would cooperate in the end would be another matter. As such, how could they not think about it? 9 out of 10 things did not go as one wished. Chapter 23:16. Although the information did not seem to have much of an impact on the situation, it was enough to have a clearer understanding of the situation. Of course, the most important thing was the return of Mu Yang and the other two. The overall strength of the flowing cloud realm had been greatly strengthened, and they were no longer in the same situation as before, where they were unable to mobilize their experts. The way the world is right now, it's really not good. Although the people from the White Bear tribe who came to the flowing cloud realm were all killed, the future is uncertain. However, it's hard to say what will happen in the future. Mu Yang sighed helplessly as he spoke. Since they were traveling in the Flame realm, they naturally did not lack information about the Wanshou realm. Now that they were only facing the White Bear tribe, it was not a big problem, and they could barely handle it. If there were a few more tribes, then it would be very scary. Let me bring you to see the current arrangements in the flowing cloud realm. After Xiao Yang finished speaking, he brought the two of them to the Taste Victory Mountain. After all, Mu Yang and the others had just returned, and they were not clear about the arrangements. Of course, because of their return, some of the arrangements would naturally be changed. In the following period of time, the cultivators of the flowing cloud realm would not have the chance to go out again. After all, as long as the threat of the Wanshou realm was not removed, the departure of a martial emperor expert might cause a gap in the entire defense line. The news of Mu Yang and the other two's return quickly spread throughout the entire flowing cloud realm, and the morale instantly rose again. Of course, the more important news was Mu Yang's breakthrough in his realm. This trip took a full 6 hours to clearly explain some of the arrangements to them. In terms of some changes, the overall defense line became more flexible and was not as rigid as before. As for the God realm, they did not mobilize any martial emperors because of Mu Yang and the others' return. This was because they knew very well that the God realm only needed to leave some people to protect themselves. Furthermore, this was just an emergency. The flowing cloud realm and the sword heart realm could be said to be the barrier between the God realm and the Wanshou realm. If there was a problem with these two barriers, then everything would collapse. At that time, the God realm would lose this advantage, and they would have no way to retreat, and would have to face everything head-on. In this way, the losses would be extremely heavy. Facing the White Bear tribe's 2 invasions, how was the realm of the gods not affected in the slightest? The reason was extremely simple. It was because the drifting cloud realm and the sword heart realm had stopped him. If the opponent wanted to directly attack the God realm, then what they would face in the end would be being cut off by the flowing cloud realm and the sword heart realm. They would be stuck in a dilemma. Therefore, everyone knew what was more important and what was more important. As for the Emperor God not being able to come out of seclusion, although there was still a knot in everyone's heart, some of their emotions had started to dissipate. Among them, there was no lack of people who wanted to save themselves, such as Qin Wang and Zhao Wang. They felt that since something had happened to the God Emperor, they had to step up. Now that things had come to this, There was no point in regretting it any further. However, their world existed here. If it was gone, it would truly be gone. They didn't want to see their world destroyed, so what they could do was to make themselves stronger until they could protect themselves. Sword Scar Abyss. It had been a few days since Bai Jian entered the Sword Scar Abyss. As far as his eyes could see, there was only darkness. Even if he opened his eyes, it was meaningless because he couldn't see anything. This place could be said to be eerie and terrifying. Occasionally, there would be gusts of chilly wind blowing. The chilly wind wasn't simple either. It actually carried sword aura, which blew his clothes until they were in rags. The Sword Scar Abyss was originally an abyss created by an almighty. The sword aura didn't completely dissipate, so it lingered in the abyss and formed sword intent. Furthermore, some of the filthy air and the dark energy fused together. When these different powers mixed together, there was an earth-shattering change. Bai Jian's current situation was considered to be better. When he had just stepped into the Sword Scar Abyss, it could be said that he had suffered an extremely terrifying blow. The chilly wind and sword aura constantly invaded his body, causing a destructive blow to his body and mind. Perhaps it was because he had experienced too much previously, but Bai Jian didn't collapse because of it. He continued to stagger forward. As he walked further and further, he suffered more and more attacks. Instead, he became indifferent or perhaps numb. However, there was an additional glimmer of light in Bai Jian's eyes. He was no longer as lifeless as before, not caring about anything. This Sword Scar Abyss is really not simple. The destruction of one's mind is truly terrifying. Bai Jian stopped and sighed helplessly as he muttered, "In this pitch-black place where even one's divine sense couldn't spread out beyond a radius of 3 meters, it was even more torturous. Without destruction, there can be no construction. I want to see what kind of true meaning the ancestor left behind in this Sword Scar Abyss." Bai Jian gritted his teeth and endured the pain as he continued forward. Bai Jian didn't know how far he had walked, but his temperament had become firmer in the face of such devastation. His hands, which were originally trembling because of the sudden breakthrough, began to stabilize now. Even though his body gradually became heavy and even his soul was somewhat turbid, the youth still continued forward. He had his own pride, and his way of the sword was even simpler. He pressed forward without hesitation. Above the Sword Scar Abyss, Li Fengmu stared down with a grim expression. Li Chuni followed beside him and said, "Ancestor, are you really unable to find out what's going on below?" Bai Jian had been down there for a long time, but there was still no news of him. There were also many sayings about the Sword Scar Abyss, because countless geniuses had gone down to explore the Great Path. But in the end, none of them were able to walk out, so it was listed as a forbidden area. Now, the number 1 genius in their sect had once again embarked on this path. Li Chuani respected his senior brother very much, so he also wanted to know what was going on. He also really wanted to see that senior brother of his, so that he could reappear in high spirits. Li Fengmu shook his head and said, "Even with my current realm, I don't dare to rashly go down. After all, what this Sword Scar Abyss targets is not as simple as one's cultivation realm." It could be said that the ancestor who had slashed out this sword back then was not necessarily at a higher realm than the current Li Fengmu. However, the truth was so cruel. He, who had already reached the highest realm in the history of the Sword Heart realm, did not dare to rashly go down to investigate. He knew how powerful this was and did not dare to act rashly. Chapter 23:17. As the news of Bai Wuxi's death spread, the drifting cloud boundary had been in a state of readiness. This went on for several months. Many people were exhausted under such a high level of vigilance. Because of the long period of vigilance, they gradually calmed down. With the frequency of attacks at the beginning, one only needed to calculate to know that something must have happened to the other side, which was why they were delayed. Of course, the core members were certain that the later the other side attacked, the fiercer their attacks would be. They would be hard to defend against. Therefore, As the days went by, everyone was on tenterhooks. The feeling of waiting like this was indeed unpleasant. It was like knowing that there was a knife hanging above your head, but you didn't know how big the knife was or when it would fall. Although the guards of the martial emperors had become more and more strict, the guards of the core warriors had gradually relaxed. Due to the difference in cultivation level, everyone's perspective would naturally differ greatly. Everything seemed to have returned to normal, but there were undercurrents surging. Plus, Left Blind and Right Blind had told Xiaoyang that the White Bear tribe's army had already set off. Although there weren't many people who came this time, they were all elites. From this, it could be seen that the White Bear tribe had probably lost all their patience, and they were prepared to stake it all and go all out. Previously, they had misjudged the strength of the drifting cloud boundary. This time, they would naturally use all their strength to take down the drifting cloud boundary. Otherwise, once news of this spread, the White Bear tribe would suffer heavy losses. If the other tribes were to share most of the benefits, the White Bear tribe would suffer heavy losses and lose everything they had invested. Xiaoyang would gather information about the situation every day and calculate in his mind. However, the results of his practice were strange. However, these were only calculations. Without a real battle, no one could say for sure what the result would be. After all, sometimes the power a person could explode in a desperate situation was not to be underestimated. Therefore, these people would become the oddity. However, no one knew exactly how many variables the other party had. As time passed, Xiaoyang became more and more depressed, because he felt that this matter was truly torturous. Although the Four Realms Alliance had frequently sent out good news during this period of time, and many almighty figures had stepped into the martial emperor realm, it was difficult to raise the morale of the people. After all, a person who had just become a martial emperor could dominate a region in the 3,000 small realms. But in this place, it was just a drop in the ocean. However, Xiaoyang's progress in this period of time was also not to be underestimated. Even without the assistance of the world spirit, the use of the world energy could be done at will and at will. This also gave Xiaoyang some confidence in his heart. After all, according to the information from Blind Left and Blind Right, the two giants of the Bai branch seemed to have joined the battle for revenge. Obviously, the opponent was determined to take down the Flowing Cloud realm and then conquer the Four Realm Alliance. If they could conquer the Four Realms, even if it was only a small realm, the benefits for a tribe would be no small matter. In fact, they could even rely on this to go further. It could be said that the White Bear tribe was driven by such huge benefits that they did their best to conquer the Four Realms. Moreover, they were not willing to share a piece of the pie with other tribes. As for the Ashwolf clan, it was merely a subsidiary clan of theirs. If they were willing, they would give them a bite to eat. If they were not, they would directly kill them. It was not a problem. After all, no matter how strong an arm was, it could not win against a thigh. Blind Left and Blind Right initially only wanted to eat some leftovers and then have a good battle record. This would also allow them to win some respect in the myriad beast realm. However, they miscalculated. This battle caused all the elites to die, leaving only the two of them to escape. Moreover, they were controlled by others. A large group of people appeared above the Flowing Cloud realm. Every one of them was dressed in long white robes. Just by standing there together, they had already formed a very powerful aura. This group of people wasn't simple at all. Just by standing there, it was sufficient to make many cultivators tremble with fear and flee in panic. The two people in the lead were an old man with white hair and a middle-aged man. There was a scar on the middle-aged man's right hand, as if a centipede was crawling on it. It was very frightening. This is the Flowing Cloud realm. As the old man spoke, his voice emitted a strong killing intent. The middle-aged man nodded and said, "That's right. We have also investigated the other realms. So what should we do?" This was the White branch of the White Bear tribe coming out in full force. They had arrived a long time ago, but they had not launched an attack. They wanted to know the Four Realm Alliance's strength. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you'll never be defeated. They had infiltrated the other 3 realms to gather information, but they did not enter the flowing cloud realm. This was because they felt that although the flowing cloud realm was the smallest and weakest realm in the 4-realm alliance, the person in charge was not simple. They must have set up many restrictions. Therefore, in order to not alert the enemy, they had to be careful. With our strength, it is not impossible to take down all 4 small realms. However, this will be very difficult. The old man stroked his hair and said worriedly. In fact, they already had an answer in their hearts, but they did not reveal it. Father, if that is the case, then we will attack the flowing cloud realm. According to the information we sent back, most of the enemy's strength is concentrated in the flowing cloud realm. As long as we can break through it, nothing will be a problem. The middle-aged man said with a smile. The old man nodded. They had already calculated this in their hearts. If they attacked separately, they could indeed attack everywhere and quickly take down the flowing cloud realm. However, the risk of doing so was too great. In the previous 2 invasions, they had lost too many people. If they continued to suffer losses in this battle, even if they took down the 4-realm alliance, they would suffer great loss and would be difficult to control. Therefore, they had to concentrate their strength. It would be best if they could take down the 4-realm alliance without any losses and quickly digest it. Chapter 23:18. Is this the place where Seer was defeated? There doesn't seem to be anything special about it. The old man frowned as he spoke. The death of Baiwuxi's body and soul was a pain in their hearts. Originally, they thought that even if they couldn't take down the entire 4-realm alliance, they would be able to take down a strategic point. At that time, this area would also become theirs. However, reality slapped them hard in the face. Despite such a powerful attack, they were completely annihilated in the end. No one could leave alive. Although they had collected a lot of information from other worlds, they still didn't think much of it. From their point of view, only Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu had some ability. As for the Emperor God, although it was rumored that he was very powerful, who knew? After all, he hadn't fought in the past thousands of years. Who could say for sure whether he was real or not? Although the other people were also rumored to be very powerful, they didn't have any achievements in this war. Therefore, it was difficult to judge. If they were really powerful, why didn't they go to the front line? Therefore, he already had a clear idea of what was going on. The middle-aged man's brows were also tightly knitted together. Baiwuxi was the future successor of the White Bear tribe. He was even in existence that could completely unify the White Bear tribe. However, he had lost his life here. Moreover, his body and soul had been destroyed. Their hearts were filled with hatred. Wherever he goes, not even a blade of grass grows. The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and said, now, the hatred in their hearts was already difficult to suppress. How could they continue to be calm when their most promising junior was dead? As soon as the middle-aged man said that, the White Bear clan behind him roared angrily, because they also respected Baiwuxi. Kill! The old man shouted. Immediately, with the 2 of them as the leaders, everyone rushed into the flowing cloud realm. They were ready to kill and avenge Baiwuxi. When they entered the flowing cloud world, Xiaoyang abruptly opened his eyes and immediately vanished from where he was. Xiao Man, who was still fanning herself, only felt a gust of wind. In the blink of an eye, the young master disappeared. Lil Man could only shake her head and sigh. She was very clearly aware that if it wasn't an extremely urgent matter, then how could the young master possibly leave in such a hurry? It was likely that the flowing cloud world would not be peaceful in the coming days. Xiaoyang sensed the invasion of a large amount of energy, and his heart immediately became very heavy. He knew very well that the knife hanging above his head had fallen. Moreover, the scale this time was many times greater than the previous 2 times. For example, the 2 leaders were probably 4th-order martial kings. As for the 3rd stage martial king, there were several of them. As for stage 2 and below, there were many of them. They were even more than the number of martial emperors in the Four Realms Alliance. And King Wu's peak polar bear warriors were even more numerous. This also confirmed that the information sent back by Blind Left and Blind Right was accurate. This time, the By bloodline was probably staking it all on one throw. They had sent all the manpower they could mobilize into the flowing cloud realm. Such a move was enough to explain a lot of problems. Naturally, there wouldn't be any peaceful days in the coming days. In fact, whether or not they would be able to survive this calamity was a huge problem. This time, the opponent could be said to be aggressive. It was almost impossible for them to be kind. Therefore, Xiaoyang immediately ordered everyone to enter the Victory Mountain as a barrier to stop the opponent's army. As for the people stationed in West Wind City and Spring Sun City, he ordered them to retreat to the Victory Mountain immediately. It could be said that all the cultivators west of the Victory Mountain had to retreat. After all, the situation had changed. If he hesitated for even a moment, the consequences would be unimaginable. Therefore, decisiveness was necessary. On the West Wind City, Elder Zhu Longhui of the Extreme Yang sect immediately began to shout after receiving the news. After all, since Lord Xiao issued such an urgent order at the first moment, it must be because the situation was urgent. Not to mention the distant past, the old Prime Minister almost lost his life because of his stubbornness. Therefore, in such a situation, how could they not be nervous and not retreat quickly? Then everything happened too fast, not giving them the slightest chance to react at all. "You don't have to go." A fierce roar came, and Zhu Longhui was also stunned on the spot, the corners of his mouth twitching. Because he didn't expect the enemy to come so quickly, a powerful pressure came rushing over, and all the guards in West Wind City couldn't control themselves, their bodies trembling involuntarily. It was the fear of the strong, and it was difficult to suppress. "Run!" Zhu Longhui roared, his hands quickly forming a seal. Now, Zhu Longhui also knew that if he activated the formation, he might be able to stop the enemy for a while. As long as he could buy some time, then his comrades would have a chance to survive. They didn't want to wait for death. However, the next moment, a bolt of lightning directly pierced through Zhu Longhui's heart. Before the formation was activated, he had already lost his life. After everyone saw Zhu Longhui fall, the fear in their hearts spread like a flood. Everyone's heart was trembling with fear. The difference in strength was so great. What should they do next? Could they still fight? Some of the weaker ones even found it hard to breathe and were about to suffocate. In the blink of an eye, the people of the White Bear tribe had directly occupied West Wind City. Their speed was so fast that it caught everyone off guard. They couldn't escape. Looking at the White Bear warriors that appeared in front of them, everyone's heart began to tremble. Some people even couldn't control their minds and launched a crazy counterattack, but it was useless and they were directly blasted to pieces by the lightning. "Leave a few alive," the old man said coldly. As soon as these words came out, the White Bear warriors immediately attacked and began to kill. This is an abandoned city, that Xiaoyang's methods are really good. Knowing that this place is easy to attack and hard to defend, he decisively abandoned it and used it as a sentry post. It's a pity that this method is meaningless. As the old man said, he casually squeezed, and a human cultivator was directly crushed into a bloody mist. In the blink of an eye, West Wind City was once again dyed with a layer of blood, turning into a purgatory on Earth. Chapter 2319. Xiaoyang rushed to Pine Victory Mountain in the shortest time possible. Fortunately, the formation had been fully activated, forming a huge barrier. It was impossible to break through it directly. Xin Wushuang, Ji Fei Muyang, and the others immediately went to different places. This was the last line of defense. No matter which side it was, it could not be lost. Otherwise, if the enemy attacked, the formation would be destroyed directly. It would be difficult to defend. In fact, everyone knew that Xiaoyang was so anxious because the White Bear tribe had attacked. Moreover, it was a strong invasion. That was why he was so nervous. They are too slow. They haven't retreated yet. Mu Yang saw that his disciples had not returned. He could not help but frown. Xiao Yang shook his head helplessly and said, "They won't be able to come back. West Wind City has fallen." Mu Yang couldn't help but furrow his brows even more when he heard this. Wasn't this speed a little too fast? In the blink of an eye, the sorrow in Mu Yang's heart was swept away, because he knew very well that this was not the time to be sad. The enemy could take down West Wind City and suppress it so quickly. It was obvious how terrifying their strength was. This also meant that the war they were about to face was going to be extremely difficult. "How confident are you that we can defend this time?" Mu Yang took a deep breath and asked reluctantly. Xiao Yang shook his head and said, "I'm not very confident this time. From what I know, the enemy has sent out 2 4th-level martial emperors." Mu Yang's face turned pale when he heard this. 4th-level martial emperor. How terrifying was that? To be able to reach such a level, whether it was in the Myriad Beast realm or the Enflame realm, they could dominate an area. The highest level among them was only Princess Mingzhu, a 3rd-level martial emperor. Xinluo, who was standing at the side, also became more nervous. Seeing how serious Xiao Yang's expression had become, he could imagine how terrifying the attack they would face this time would be. Whether or not they could survive had become an extremely difficult problem. So, the only thing you can do now is to not take even half a step onto Xianxing Mountain and use it as a foundation to resist, Xiao Yang said in a deep voice. Mu Yang nodded with a grave expression. From Xiao Yang's expression, he could tell how serious this matter was. Back then, when Xiao Yang broke the rules of the Trichiliocosm and forcefully broke through to become the 10th martial emperor, he was able to calmly deal with the heavenly punishment. But now his expression was so nervous. From this, it could be seen that he was not very confident. In fact, the strength of their opponents was enough to make them despair. "Looks like this is going to be a tough battle," Mu Yang sighed and muttered. Previously, when he was in the Enflame realm, he had already heard of the fierce reputation of the Wanshou realm. Who would have thought that he would have to face him so soon? This was truly a headache. Since there was nothing he could do, he could only fight with all his might. Perhaps because of this, they could still fight for a chance of survival. Previously, they had also discussed giving up on the Drifting Cloud realm and focusing all their strength on the God realm. This way, they might be able to preserve their strength. But although this suggestion had its benefits, it was still rejected. After all, the Drifting Cloud realm could be used as a buffer. Once they retreated to the God realm, there would be no place to retreat. At that time, it would be just as difficult to fight their way out. Of course, the main problem was their foundation. Once their foundation was destroyed, the Drifting Cloud realm would be greatly damaged, and it would be difficult to recover. Therefore, their only choice was to fight to the death and prevent their opponents from attacking. As long as they could preserve their lives, then everything would be fine. If they could not preserve their lives, then there was nothing they could do. The soldiers stationed in Spring Sun City had all returned without any losses. "Looks like they are preparing to kill us from West Wind City," Mu Yang said helplessly with a bitter smile. Xiao Yang nodded in agreement. This kind of headstrong fighting method was very simple. However, this kind of attacking method was also quite terrifying. Based on these details, he was able to analyze many problems. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Princess Mingzhu also arrived. However, she was travel-worn. She glanced at Xiao Yang and her eyes were filled with surprise. Because Princess Mingzhu and Xiao Yang were both in North Light City, but his cultivation level was 1 level lower. Yet he arrived faster than her. "How are the people who came this time?" Princess Mingzhu asked. Xiao Yang could only smile bitterly and helplessly. "Both of us might die here." Once this was said, the expressions of Chu Nanfeng, Baldi, and the others changed. From this sentence, they could feel how powerful their opponents were. Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu were publicly recognized as the two strongest people. At least, before the God Emperor came out of seclusion, that was the case. If even they did not have the chance to survive, then how could they? Looks like the people who came this time are not weak. Then, let me see, Princess Mingzhu said as the corners of her lips curled up slightly. From Princess Mingzhu's point of view, only by continuously fighting with cultivators who were stronger than her could she increase her strength quickly. As for whether she would die in battle, she did not think too much about it. From her point of view, it was impossible. Hence, there was no need to consider it. Looks like it's really difficult this time. Muyang smiled bitterly and said helplessly. Everyone's expression became very serious at this moment. They knew that what they were going to face next would be a tough battle, and they might even lose their lives. However, so what? As long as they could protect their own world. So what if they lost their heads? On the other hand, Xiao Yang did not say a word. This was because he had already started to plan in his mind. How to achieve the greatest result was also the thing he needed to consider the most. How to fight had to be carefully considered. Even though they had already deduced dozens of possibilities, they still had to make changes. After all, it was always right to be more flexible. Do we need to ask for help from the God realm? Since the other party is staking everything on this, there should not be any problems in other areas. The old Prime Minister stood out and asked in a low voice. However, as soon as the old Prime Minister finished his words, he saw a group of people charging at him at high speed. Some of the White Bear warriors even revealed their true forms and stomped on the ground until it shook.